Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Kai, Kang, Ebony, and Sarah for being early. How's everybody doing today? Hello, my early joiners.
Hi, Michelle. How are you today?
Good. Who is this?
Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Oh, hello. Now I see your face.
Yes.
I get to be with you all today.
Oh, wonderful.
In past, I did the beginning and the end, so I haven't seen you all much at all. How's it going?
Good. It's been an amazing class. Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I tell you what, I found myself using my Ignite book, and I still have it, throughout when I was selling, because it had so much great information and I just added to it. So you all are almost done.
We are.
Can you believe it's gone quickly? I'm sure. Well, some days I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah, but you're at the tail end, and then tomorrow I'll be with you as well, and we'll wrap it up. It's called Blast Off, and after we do Blast Off, then we'll do the test, and the test is easy if you'll just review your information. Um, it's I've only seen one person not pass it in all my years.
Mm.
So if you've stayed engaged in the events, you should be in good shape, not to worry. Do you all have any questions you want to ask before we get started? We're early, so you've got my total attention. No? All right.
Oh, what's your name, ma'am?
I'm Michelle Byers. I am one of the brokers at Keller Williams Atlanta North, the East Cobb office.
How are you? I'm Ebony Patino.
Ebony Patino, nice to meet you.
Peachtree
Thank you.
Road. Likewise.
Thank you. Great. I love my Rawls group. There's 6 amazing offices. And then when I do roll call, I'll be able to put the name and the Market Center together because we'll do it in order. And we've got about 7 more minutes, so you all are welcome to ask anything you want to. If you've got questions or you just want to chat. So far, we've got 18 people on. You know, do you all, while we're talking about this, one of the things that I've noticed, a lot of us are having to do Zoom meetings. Have any of you done Zoom meetings with your clients or to reach out to people? Anybody? Well, the reason I ask is there's an article in the National Association of Realtors magazine this month, and it's information about doing Zoom meetings. And it's been interesting because we started these in March, and I don't know how many of you all have been with us since March, but in March, it was interesting. In the beginning, people were showing up like they were going to go to work. They were dressed, their hair was done, everybody looked good. And as we've gone on, it's interesting because we've gotten more relaxed. And what I will tell you is, and this was what the article was about, was looking professional, looking good on Zoom, because for any of you that haven't done this, you've got seconds to create a first impression. And so what I would tell you is, even if you're doing Zoom, whether it be a meeting or with your clients, do what you can to give your best foot forward like you're meeting them in person. Don't think of this as just an alternative way, because we may have to do this for quite some time. So anybody have any comments on that?
That's great, Miss Michelle.
Well, thank you. I've seen everything. I've seen where I'm thinking, don't be walking around when you're talking to someone, preferably. I mean, it's different if you're talking to your family, but it's hard to concentrate. Have you all noticed that when you've got someone that's moving, it's hard to follow? Anybody?
Yeah,
Well,
I agree with that. But I think it was Ben, he was an instructor one of the days. He was saying the same thing about when we're doing our lead gen calls in the morning, like get up, get dressed, act like you're getting ready for work when you sit at your desk. so that you
Correct.
feel, because you present yourself differently, whether it's on the phone or on Zoom when you're, dressed up. So,
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. I agree. Do you know in the very beginning, when this happened, when we had to shelter in place and we had closed our office, I would get up every morning, take a shower, get dressed, just like I'm sitting here today. But I'd also put perfume on because that was my routine. So I did everything. Now, did anybody know I had perfume on? No, nobody knew, but I did. It was just my routine. So create something that, and you never know, because I've had people call me and say, could we do a quick Zoom meeting? Well, if I'm not dressed like I'm working for that day, I'm not really ready to do it. So anyway, it just a thought. And how many of you like doing Zoom calls with other people? Let's just say it was you and I. I mean, do you like doing them? If you don't, just practice with one another. And they indicate when you're, and I should be doing this. I'm going to do this. All right. One of the things it said is never have your computer below you, be at eye level. And I did not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, while we're talking, I'm going to move my computer to eye level. And let's just see if that makes me look any different. Now I look like I'm in with it, right? So there's little tricks. There's actually a button that you can enhance your, it's supposed to be like a Photoshop that gives you a better look. Now, for me, I'm not sure it worked, but I turned it on just in case. So anyway, we've got about 1 more minute, and right now we've got 31 people on the call. Make sure that you are, you have your picture on and that you are live video before we get started. And how many of you, notice my background? How many of you realize that you can do a background so that no matter where you're at, it just looks like a background? So I could be sitting in my, in my den, and you don't know because you've got a different background. Now I like Charles Turman. Am I saying it right?
Yes.
Charles, you look like you're a mega agent in a big city. Would that be correct?
That is Piedmont Park.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Great. So they can be fun. I cheated. I used the Keller Williams background, but there's all sorts of backgrounds that you could do, and you can change them out as you go along. So, all right, we are at 1 o'clock, and LaTanya wants to know, how do you create the background? And I'm going to write that down, and I'll send you where you can get the background information. How about that? Because there's a bunch of them. And when I do classes, I always have the background information on. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let me introduce myself for everyone that's on now. We've got 34 participants. I'm Michelle Byers, and I am one of the brokers at Keller Williams Atlanta North, which is the East Cobb office. A little background on me is I've been with Keller Williams for 8 years, and I started with Keller Williams, and I will remain with Keller Williams throughout my career. Before that, I was 29 years in mortgage banking. So I come in with a finance background, and so a total of 37 years doing real estate, either on the side of lending or the side on the buyer seller. And 3 years ago, I decided to get my broker's license, which you all can do. If you want, you have 3 years. You need 3 years experience, and then you too can take the broker's test. It is even more fun than the pre-licensing test, because the pre-licensing test you get to take again. You have to pass it again. And then when you pass that, you get to take the broker's test, which is theory. It is all problem solving, whereas before everything was multiple choice. This one, you have to answer questions in series that make sense and come to the right answer. So it was a little different, but I am probably, here's what I really miss, and this is why I enjoy teaching Ignite or facilitating in this case, is I miss the sales part of it. I miss the excitement of getting a buyer, client, or a seller. So lucky for you all, you're starting, and I wish you the very, very best. If you'll follow this, I took my Ignite and I followed it to the T. I did all the homework assignments. I did it every day. I continued on, and I ended up Rookie of the Year that year. And it wasn't because I was any smarter. I'm not. You all are probably smarter than me. I just know how to follow directions. So if you follow the directions, you're going to do extremely well. So how many people like to follow directions? Yay. How many people think directions, you should just be creative and not follow directions? Anybody? Okay. Well, I will tell you this. The guidelines that we are giving you throughout this will help you become more creative, because once you have a system, then you can add your twist to it, make it unique to you, and go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and call roll. Let me take our pictures. All right. So I want everybody to smile. Looking good. Okay, we've got shot 1, shot 2, perfect. What a great group of people. Shot 3, thank you very much. Shot 4, let me see if I've got anybody. Shot 5 and shot 6. I think that's it. All right, Brian White, are you there? You weren't in there. Let me take that thing again. All right. I want to make sure everybody. And Dion, are you going to be stationary?
I will be in 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Because I know that you all had to be stationary. So, okay, let's do this. Let's go ahead and get started with the roll call. So Lisa Byers. I know, I see Lisa. Y'all take yourself off mute right
sorry,
now.
I'm here. I'm
Okay,
sorry, here.
perfect, not a problem. How about Stephanie? Of course, I talked to Stephanie, so I know she's here. Terry Davis, I saw. Here. Nick DeSalle.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Stetson, I saw Stetson. Say hi, Stetson. And Keisha Welch.
Hi, Stetson.
Do we have Keisha here today?
Hey, Michelle.
Oh, hello. Thank you. Okay, that was the fantastic Atlanta North team. Now we're going to do the terrific Atlanta Perimeter. That would be am I saying this right? Anjali? Angela. See, thank you. My apologies. Okay.
No, she's not
Angela.
here.
Oh.
I was just helping you pronounce her name.
Well, thank you. It's beautiful. Okay, so how about Brandon Johnson? No Brandon Johnson? Jenny Sian?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. And if I mispronounce your name, please correct me. Brian White.
Here.
All right, thank you. And Tracy Powell. Okay. LaTonya Brown.
I'm here.
Thank you. Dion DeLone.
Dion DeLone is here.
Okay, thank you. Christina Dobbs. Alex Fennell. Fennell?
I'm here, Alexa.
Thank you. Hi. Alicia Justice? Alicia Justice?
I'm here.
Hi, 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 hi.
I was muted, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Everybody unmute while we're doing this. Con Lee?
Right here.
Okay, thank you. Helen Martinez?
I'm here.
All right, thank you, Helen. LaQuisha?
LaQuisha Mungeon, I'm here.
Thank you. My reading glasses aren't really good and this is very small print, so thanks for helping me here.
You're welcome.
Conrad?
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's Conrad.
Nicole Davis?
it's pronounced Conrad, by the way.
Conrad?
Yeah,
Oh, is there an L in there?
yeah, there's an L in there. That's correct.
Okay, it needs to be silent. Conrad, thank you,
Yes.
Conrad. Okay,
Thank you.
got it. Nicole Davis, Pass Davis. Raquel Nicholson. Mason Spencer. Okay. Sarah Black.
Here.
All right. Oh, and I didn't say the terrific Peachtree Road. Okay. Sarah Black is here. Amanda.
Here.
Thank you, Amanda. Claudette. Claudette. Lucas.
Hello.
Hello. Chelsea Gandy.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. I know I'm not saying this right. Atrell Gillis.
I'm here. Atrio.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Atriel. Celeste Gordon.
That's me.
Thank you. Okay. Jasmine Larry. Ebony, I know you're here because we talked. Hi, Ebony.
Hello.
Matthew Schneider. Matthew Schneider.
He's not here, I know.
What's that?
He's not here.
Okay,
I'm
thank
his
you.
teammate.
Okay, Cindy Sharon.
Here.
Thank you. All right. Anastasia.
This is me.
Hi, me. All right. Latanya Spriggs.
Here.
Thank you.
Right here.
Thank you. Rashida Thurman.
Right here.
Charles Turman.
Here.
Okay. Last but not least, the amazing Buckhead. So how about Carissa Allwood?
Here.
Thank you. Tamara, Doctor. Tamara. Kai Harris.
Here.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Dwayne Newman.
Here.
Okay. Ashley Reed.
Here.
All right, thank you. And Tatara Surlas.
Tatiara Soros here.
Thank you. Okay. Courtney Rundell.
Here.
Thank you. And Lorena Duquay.
Here.
Okay. All right. Is anybody on here that I did not call their name?
You didn't call my name. Rachel.
Oh, hey, Rachel, I'm sorry.
And I know you.
I know. It was a trick. Okay. See if you were paying attention. You are. So
Okay.
you're checked off. Anybody else? Thank you.
Yes, Trina Clapperton.
Okay, Trina, you are with what Market Center?
Peachtree.
Peachtree. Okay. Trina. Oh, here we go. Okay, thank you. Who else? Anybody? All right, so are we ready to get started? I'm looking for, I don't sit and listen to nobody. You can put your speakers on if you want to, but what I wanted to do is the first 30 minutes, of course, was roll call, but I did want to go over, we'll do our calls, but I want to go over to what today's expectations are, what you're going to be learning. So you're going to need to know the basic steps on contract to close. They can be different, or they are different if you are working with a buyer and if you're working with a seller. So there is a checklist in this section that you can use. Also, we're going to have Kim Smith today joining us, who will be teaching this class, and she actually owns a contract to close company. So hers checklist may be a little bit different. What I would tell you is compare the two and then chat with seasoned agents to get what they do. You know, sometimes it's just, it's kind of a, I used to get different checklists and then combine them and see. So this will be something that you learn. You also want to identify what your responsibilities are when you're representing the buyers and the sellers. There are different things that you're going to go through. And I used to have a checklist that was 3.5 pages long for my sellers, because I did mostly listings. And it was people will ask me for it, and then I go, you really don't want mine, because mine was just like the minutia of everything. It was to write a thank you letter after I met with them, and to write a thank you letter after they signed with me. And so I did things a little different. This is where your personality will come in. You'll follow a certain checklist, but if you want to add things to it, please feel free to do so, because if it sets you apart as an agent, it's going to make you memorable, right? That is correct. I'm going to answer that for you. But the other thing, we want to learn to leverage our resources. And our resources a lot of times are going to be our vendors, people that we do business with. If you're working with a buyer, they'll say, well, who should I use as an inspector? So you want to go to your market center and see who the vendors are that are in your market center and start to create a list. Those vendors can also be in your database because they could be sources of referrals for you, correct? If you're referring to them, should they not refer to you? Absolutely. So just follow that along. And then you're implementing post-closing systems. Post-closing means after the close, because that relationship doesn't end because you've closed. It's just a new chapter, because now you're going to market to them and you're going to follow up with them so that they can in turn refer you business, refer you to friends, family, and then you're going to stay in touch with them throughout your career, so that when they go to purchase their next home or their second home or whatever they might be doing, they know how to get in touch with you. Do you know there's a statistic that NAR put out, National Association of Realtors, that said that they interviewed clients after they had closed on a transaction, and more than 80% of them, and I don't remember the exact number, said that they would use their agent again. So you all, going forward, are going to do an amazing job, but if you don't keep in touch with them, they're going to lose your card. They may not know how to get you. They may not remember your name completely. So it's your job then to stay in touch with them. But statistically proven, only 12% of people use the same agent. And that is because they don't keep in touch. So for you that are new, do not ever take the line that people will give you, because they want to hold you at bay. If you say, you know, I'd love to work with you, and people will say, I've already got an agent. How many of you have experienced that? Just show me your hands. Okay, I see some people names going up. So what I would tell you is that since we know statistically only 12% use them, what would be a good line for you to use if they say that? Somebody want to, what do you think?
maybe ask if they actually signed a contract? Because
You could, but let's just say that, you know, hey, I had a great agent and that's who I'll use going forward, but I'm not looking for anything. What else could you say? I think that's great if they, you know, you ask that question.
Are they still in the business?
What's that?
Are they still in the business? Or
Well, that's right. Yeah. Well, here's what I would say. I mean, what I used to say is, that's great. Obviously, you had a good experience. May I be your number 2 agent in case for some reason they are not in the business, or they are busy, or you can't find them. How about you let me just at least provide information? So, you know, I'm not asking to move in. I'm just asking, can we date? And may I be that second option for you? And a lot of times people say, okay. So don't, as new agents, let the fact that they're going to say that to you, because we know only 12% use their agent again. So how many of you did your homework? All right. I'm seeing smiles. You know, we're big boys and girls now. Nobody can make you do anything. What I will tell you to do is that if you did not do your homework, you're just reducing your income. Because if you don't have a database, how many of you have been really good about putting their database into command, people that they're meeting? Kai is raising her hand. Stephanie, Ebony. Do I see Ebony, or is that just something in the background, Ebony? Nick is doing it. LaTanya doing it. Cindy, thank you. And Terry Davis is doing it. Here's what it is don't be the secret agent. So if you've done that, now you can start to learn command and do little videos that you can send out to your clients. You can do emails, you can do Twilio, where you can do texting. There's all sorts of really cool things because you want to keep in touch with them. So for those of you that haven't been doing their database, who's your clients? I mean, really, who is your clients? And how many of you, I check my agents. They don't know I do this, so I'm telling them right now. I call and I hope I get your email. I mean, not your email, your voicemail. How many of you say, hello, this is Terry Davis with Keller Williams Atlanta North. I'm sorry I could not take your call. Leave your name, number, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why? Well, you don't want to use Terry's name, obviously, on yours, but why would we do that versus just that nothing call?
So they know establish who you are as a.
They know who you are. They know that they've gotten the right person.
They know you're an agent.
That you're an agent. That's correct. I can't tell you how many times I call agents and I get nothing. That doesn't say, I mean, can you imagine if you called Nordstrom's and the phone picked up and it just said, leave a message? Or it said nothing, it just buzzed. This is your business, so please be doing that. So, okay, so how many of you have written thank you notes? Did we do 10 this week? If we didn't do 10, at least the people that did thank you notes, some of them, is better off. I will tell you a story real quickly, and I hope you'll remember this. I've had people say, oh, nobody cares about thank you notes. Well, I met a young lady at a baby shower, and I wrote her a thank you note. I didn't know her home address, so I sent it to her work because she told me where she worked. And I just said, you know, it was really nice to meet you. I enjoyed talking with you. Here's my card if I can ever be of help. That's all I put. I just said thank you. And her husband called 2 months later and said, this is the first card handwritten card, not email, but handwritten card we've gotten ever, thanking us for just meeting. And so we want to buy a home and we want to use you. And then within 2 months, I had earned a commission of $14,000 for about $1 investment. Was that worth it? again, set yourself apart. Do the things that other people aren't doing. Those are what makes successful agents. So not every thank you card will get the same response, but I guarantee you, you'll get more of a response by doing it than not doing it at all. So anyway, the other homework assignments, how many of you talked with an agent, some of the senior agents in your market center, and got ideas from them about what their best tips on the transaction process, the contract to close? Did any of you do that? Okay, do that. I promise you, you want to do that because you want to get different ideas because everybody does it a little bit different. There's no set way, there's just certain things you need to be doing. So take the time. And why do I encourage you to talk with the agents in your office? Now, it's a little harder, I know, because we're doing the more of the shelter in place and we're not in the office as much. But why do I want you to talk with senior agents?
They're more experienced. They've done it before.
That's one reason. What else do you think would be the reason?
You can have options, a variety of options of how different people do things.
Absolutely. That's good. Here's one thing I want you to remember. The second year in my business, it was a third of the business came from other agents in my office. They got too busy and they knew that I was involved. I had gotten Rookie of the Year. That's not the end all, but I stayed engaged and I asked them questions and I complimented them on their achievements, and I was just part of that office. And so you're giving yourself an opportunity when you put yourself, it's networking. So why wouldn't you want to network with people that are doing it at a high level? But the best part of it is that a third of my business, I tracked it, came from the relationships I developed just by talking to them. So go in and introduce yourself and ask questions, and they're, I promise you, happy to share with you. So
that's so true. I've had that same experience since I first started.
Good, good. All right, perfect. And, you know, there's a lot of people that decide that they want to maybe explore going on to teams. Well, if they know you, you're going to have a much easier conversation than if they don't know you. So make yourself known. You want to make yourself known to potential clients, right? Well, agents can be potential clients too, because they can send you business. So, all right, I think that that was your homework. How many of you love making these calls now? If we just spend the next, let's just say 10 minutes making our calls, reaching out to people. Can we do that? I think we can do it. Nobody's answering yes, so I'll just say we will do that. How about that? And the whole idea is
yes,
yes. One or two, it's called made, and it's a good habit to learn. So you're to leave your camera on, sit in front of where you're at, and let me watch you make some phone calls. All right, so it is now 1:25. At 1:35, we will start into the session. So go, and you can put in chat room if you're having success. Okay, let's brag on each other.
I'm actually on my mobile device right now because my iPad is having some issues, so I won't be able to make my calls right now, just as the FYI.
Okay, all right, so when are you going to do it?
During break, how about that?
Hey, that's a great idea. Look, see, you've already come up with a solution. Perfect. Thank you. We've got about 2 minutes and then we'll wrap it up. All right, everybody with me? Okay. Are we good? It is now 1:35. Kim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, Kim. Here's the trick. I'm going to hit share screen. Are you able to do share screen on your end?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm going to let you take over. How about that?
All right, sounds great. It might take me a second to get situated. While I'm doing that, everybody, I just put in the chat a link that you can go to and you can download a buyer and a seller checklist that tells you what to do when you get your first contract done.
Thank you, Kim. That's great.
All right.
Kim, why don't you tell everyone about yourself and then you can get started.
All right, super. So my name is Kim Smith. I'm with the closing company. The reason they let me teach this class is because I used to be a real estate agent, such as yourself, and I also worked at a closing attorney's office. I put those two things together in October of 2005 to start this business, helping real estate agents with their contract to close tasks. So what we do is once a person has a binding agreement, they send it over to us, and then we handle most of the things between that point and closing. So just about everything that I'm going to teach you today is what we do, and I'm looking forward to working with y'all and hearing your questions. And this is a participatory class, so I'm going to be asking some questions as we go along, so don't y'all fall asleep now. Let me see if I can find what I need to find to share my screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Huh, okay. All right, let's see. Let's see what we need to do. Share screen.
Anastia is getting warm. She got her blanket on.
Okay, try this.
All right. Okay, this is looking good.
Good. Perfect.
Everybody with me? See my screen? Okay, super.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to move y'all over here so that I can see you. Is there something in the middle that says leave meeting that you see right now? Do you have something in the middle of the screen? Okay, good. Interesting. I'm just going to try to move this over somewhere else. So stick with me for a moment. All right. So this is the close the deal portion of our class. And I've taken this straight out of the manual. As Michelle might have mentioned earlier, some of the stuff is not straight out of the manual, and that's because contract to close can be different on a regional basis. In your manual, there are some terms that we don't use, and it can be a little bit confusing. So I've written this manual in a way that will teach you exactly what we do here in Georgia for contract to close. And Michelle also had a really good idea that, you know, along with the checklist that I've sent you, if you want to talk to an experienced agent at your office and get their take for some of the things that they might add to the process, that would be great too. So the first part was getting your head in the game. Closing is not an event, it's a complex process that involves a series of steps, multiple parties, and a myriad of details. This is where you can truly shine as a customer service experience professional. It's your job to ensure that all steps are completed on time and all parties are aware of their roles and what's expected of them. Essentially, your role becomes that of a project manager, in addition to being a knowledgeable and calm fiduciary for your client. In a successful contract to close process, the transaction closes on time as expected. Number 2, the process is smooth and painless for all parties involved. And number 3, and maybe most importantly, you win future business due to your 10++ customer service. And number 3 happens more if 1 and 2 happen, right? So how will you all ensure these 3 outcomes? Rachel Venata, what do you think?
What was the question, please? Repeat.
How will you ensure these 3 outcomes? How will you make sure that the transaction closes on time, the process is smooth, and you win future business?
You know, by staying connected to your client and asking them the right questions and getting them informed of all the process from start to finish, I guess.
That's right. And we're going to learn more about the processes and the steps we take to make sure that number 1 and number 2 happen so that you get those referrals, okay? So let's go to know the players. Closing, sometimes known as settlement. Pretty much all the time here, they call it a closing. Settlement and escrow is used more in other states, but you might hear settlement from time to time. It's a detail-driven process that brings together a variety of parties to legally finalize the sales transaction. Depending on the specific details and location of the transaction, the parties to the sale may include the following individuals. We have buyers, we have sellers, we have other agents. Who here knows the term for the agent on the other side of the transaction? So whenever you're the buyer's agent or the selling agent, what do we typically call the agent on the other side of the transaction? Anybody know?
Cooperating broker?
That's right, the co-op agent. Very nice. We've got an expert here. All right, attorney.
I
The lender, loan officer, mortgage processor, and members of your team. More players, the closing attorney, and at their office you might deal with the pre-closer or the closer. These are the folks that, the pre-closer is the person who first works on your file. The closer is the person who prepares the settlement statement. And the closing attorney, of course, is the person who sits with your clients at the table, or now might not sit with your client at the table, and actually goes through the documentation with them. Third parties, you might have a relocation company, a 1031 exchange company, or an estate involved. Family or friends lending money to the buyer for the down payment, and market center staff, your MCA, market center administrator, transaction coordinator, etc. As a project manager of the transaction, make it your responsibility to ensure that all parties know what is expected of them and deliver on time their commitments. Deliver on their commitments on time. There's no such thing as over communication. Clearly outline the role and responsibility you own. Set expectations with all parties involved about how and when things will happen. Be the go-to resource, the problem solver when needed, and reassure your client and other parties throughout the process. And you know, I have a belief, and Sean Rawls, who used to run the Rawls Group, he used to say, the smartest agent is the one who writes the contract. And to me, that means that I don't sit there and say that something is somebody else's job typically, you know, I'm going to be checking on somebody else's job as well to make sure that it gets done properly. So, you know, I'm not just waiting around to find out if the buyer has their financing. I'm going to call and check even when I'm on the seller side just to make sure, that type of thing. You know, I'm going to send the contract to the lender when I'm on the seller side, even though it's the buyer's side that's technically their responsibility. I want to make sure that that complete contract has gotten there and that something doesn't come up at the last minute, that the other agent maybe forgot to send an exhibit or an amendment or something like that, if that makes sense. Any questions on this so far?
Item number 2, the third party, would a mortgage broker or the banking institution be considered a third party as well?
Well, I mean, I guess you could consider that, except for they're really a first party. They're not on the contract, but they are involved as one of the major parties. So I don't think it really matters whether you call them a first party or a second party or a third party. If there's a lender involved, you know, they're going to be intimately involved in the transaction.
Okay.
All right, review the contract and record important dates. This is the class participation section. When you get a real estate contract, what are some of the contract deadlines?
Due diligence period.
Yes. We have a binding agreement date. What else? Earnest money
Inspection.
deadline, right?
Yeah.
Due diligence. What else?
Inspection.
Yep, that's under due diligence.
Due diligence, yeah.
Does the
Closing date.
Closing date, yep, I'm gonna bring that up last. What else are we thinking about? What else is there a deadline for in this contract?
Financing contingency.
That's right. And what else having to do with the financing?
Appraisal.
Appraisal, boom. What if the buyer needs to sell their property before we close?
Oh, that's a contingency.
There could be a buyer sale of home deadline, right? That could be a contingency to the contract. Now, if the buyer is getting a loan, who knows the name of the other deadline that we need to be aware of?
Commitment, mortgage commitment date or something?
The financial contingency date.
Close.
The financial contingency date.
Yes, that's up here. The closing disclosure deadline. So there is a deadline by which the lender must provide the buyer with their closing disclosure. And that deadline is 3 business days, Saturdays included, before the closing. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. And of course, we have the closing date. Very good, y'all. Very good. All right. Now, so let's say this is more class participation, just so you're on your toes, okay? Let's say we have a contract and we have a binding agreement date of August 1st, okay? And our due diligence period is 10 days. What day does our due diligence end?
Including weekends?
Our contract does not say that it's business days only.
Hello?
Okay.
That's right.
Hello?
You said the 11th. Seeing
Hi.
your microphone's on and you're on the
Can I help
phone.
you?
Thank you. So the 11th, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows how to count these deadlines, because I've had folks who've been in the business 10 years who for some reason do not know this. So let's all follow along. So it's 10 days from the binding agreement date. So we count day 1 as the day after. So if we go binding on the 1st, we go 1, which is this day, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the 11th is our deadline. And who knows what time on the 11th?
11:59.
That's right, 11:59 p.m. So and we're going to talk more about this in a few minutes, any amendments on due diligence that need to be signed, they need to be signed by all parties and fully executed with the binding date prior to 11:59 on that due diligence deadline. Very good. All right, let's say, class, that we have a finance contingency period that is 21 days, and we go binding on the 1st. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So it'd be on the 22nd. Is everybody following along with that? Everybody, I want you to nod your heads. This is so important. I need to see a nod. Yes, we know how to, okay, I'm beating a dead horse. Great. So one more, just for good measure. We're binding on the 1st, and our appraisal contingency date is, we've got 15 days for the appraisal contingency date.
16.
That's right, the 16th. All right, you all pass. Let's move on to the next. All right, binding agreement date. Let's see, let me fix this. The date is, so the binding agreement date is the date that the person who made the last offer, when they receive notice that their offer has been accepted. That person is typically the one who's going to fill in the binding agreement date. And this date can be filled in on the bottom of the signature page, or you can use a F819 binding agreement date notification. So I've got that, and that's right down here at the bottom of your signature page on your purchase and sale, or the signature page, which is the 3rd page of your counter offer, okay? So this always has to be filled in, because this is the deadline from the date from which every single deadline on the contract will flow, okay? Earnest money deadline. Earnest money should be given at time of contract or by the deadline date on the contract. If your earnest money is being held by the closing attorney, an F510 and F511 will be required. I'm going to pull that up just really quick so you can see what it looks like, so bear with me. F5, 10, and 11. So this should be attached to each form, and you're going to put the closing attorney's information down here, and the buyer and seller are going to initial this as a part of your contract if you have the attorney holding the earnest money. This is a very common mistake I see. It gets sent, the contract gets sent out, you know, saying that the closing attorney is holding the earnest money, but this wasn't ever filled out, so it gets done, you know, people are doing it afterwards. And then you also need this agreement. You need to get the attorney to agree to hold the earnest money, so they need to sign this agreement as well. So there's a place down here at the bottom on the 2nd page. You just shoot this, once you get your contract, you can just shoot this over to the closing attorney, ask for their signature, you get it signed, you turn it into your office, okay? If earnest money is received later than the date indicated on the contract, you must do an amendment to state when the earnest money was received. Is that clear, everyone? Okay, great. And right here it says earnest money shall be paid by, and you want to check one, either check. Typically, we're not using cash nowadays, are we? Or wire transfer, immediately available funds as follows. As a matter of fact, though, I think I did see somebody send over a picture of some cash lately. That was crazy. I don't know who that was. I'll have to find out.
Kim, could I just add to that? We just had an addition where it says, let me move the pictures. See where you see a blank? We can now do ACH funds. I don't know if all market centers can, but Atlanta North can. So they can do, it's like a Venmo. And so you would put within how many days in lieu of doing wire transfer, which
Are
we
you
only
saying
allow.
that would be a number you would check and put ACH funds?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
so you would add that down here. Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. Due diligence deadline. All right, we talked about this a moment ago. This is the deadline by which the buyer has to do any and all inspections on the property. If the buyer wants any repairs or any other adjustments to the contract, like a reduced purchase price or an increased seller paid closing costs, an amendment must be submitted to the seller and fully executed by both parties prior to 11:59 p.m. on the due diligence date. If no amendment is executed, buyer is obligated to purchase the home as is. So here's something that'll probably happen to you in your real estate career. You're working on the buyer's side of the transaction. You send over an amendment to the seller side and you don't hear anything back. And it's coming up on the due diligence deadline. Maybe it's that date and you still haven't gotten a response yet. Or the listing agent might say something like, hey, the sellers are on a cruise in the Caribbean and they can't sign right now, but they're fine with this amendment. They're fine with whatever, you know, you have here on paper. They just can't sign it till they get back. Well, the key thing to indicate and to make sure that your buyers understand is that without a fully executed amendment stating whatever it is that your buyers want, the sellers are not legally bound to anything. And technically, if it were to be brought in front of a judge, they would have bought the house as is. That's their worst case scenario. So if you're rolling up to that 11:59 p.m. on the due diligence deadline and you don't have an amendment, your buyer can either, you know, y'all can either submit a termination, terminate the contract, or the buyer just needs to understand and be okay with the worst case scenario that they might be purchasing the home as is. Now the sellers might get back from the Caribbean, sign off on whatever amendment, and it's all good, but they might not. And so that's the important thing for you to make sure that your buyers understand is they're not obligated to do anything that's not fully executed prior to that deadline. Does that make sense, everyone? Nod. Okay, any questions on that? Okay.
I have a question about the form, the is it 511?
Yes.
Where do you find that form?
You can find it in your, you can find it in RDocs. You can also find it wherever you get your forms in command if you're getting them out of DocuSign. So wherever you're writing your contract, wherever you get your contract, this should be in there too. This is one of your GAR forms.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Should get that form filled out, the F511. So if the seller is requesting their attorney holds the earnest money, are they the ones that's getting that filled out, or is it the buyer side?
Either side. I mean, it would be nice if the seller side would send it, but like I said, the smarter agent's the one who writes the contract, and I don't like to just, I can ask them if they're going to do it, but if they're not going to do it, I'm probably going to do it. You know what I mean? I don't want to like wait around.
Gotcha.
You'll just find over time that sometimes the person on the other side of the transaction is not quite as motivated or together as you are. So we don't want to assume that they're going to do this stuff. You know, we can inquire, and then I would just, you know, let it go and do it anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Right,
good question. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, and one more thing on this, just for the contract's sake, due diligence period, you would fill in the amount of days here. Here, if there's not any, typically I don't see additional option money. So if there's not any, please put 0 or NA right here. If you don't, Sherry's going to get you, or your compliance person at your office is going to notice it, and then you're going to have to come back afterward and do an amendment to the contract, putting a 0 in there. So just FYI. Finance contingency deadline. Some of y'all mentioned this one before. This is the deadline by which the buyer needs to determine that they can get the loan. If the buyer wants to terminate under the finance contingency, they A, must notify the seller in writing that they are terminating prior to the finance contingency deadline, and must provide the seller a loan denial letter from the lender within 7 days of notifying the seller of termination. And Michelle added at the team meeting, I think it was either earlier today or earlier, she was saying that, you know, and it has, that loan denial letter has to be dated as of the finance contingency deadline, if that makes sense. So I've had folks before, I even had a person who told me, an agent who told me they were going to terminate under the finance contingency deadline, but their buyer hadn't been denied yet. And I'm like, well, you can't do that. And she's like, oh, yes, you can. And I was thinking, somebody's going to nail you one of these days on that. You know what I mean? Some agent, you're going to try to send over a termination, and they're going to say, where's your loan denial letter? In fact, almost every agent should catch that. So if somebody sends over a termination in the finance contingency, they need to have a loan denial. If they don't, then they can't terminate under that contingency and get their earnest money back.
Kim, let me just add, you know, this becomes an issue when your financing contingency ends on a Saturday or Sunday, because if that loan denial was not dated on a Friday, because the lenders are not working Saturdays and Sundays for the most part, then you've got a problem. And I challenged another agent with that. And we ended up getting our seller $8,600 in earnest money because they couldn't prove that they had really gotten a denial.
Yeah. And so one thing that I didn't mention, and probably because this slideshow is new, when I figure out those deadlines at the beginning, when I get the contract, I put all my deadlines in my calendar with reminders that set for several days before. And I do that for every single contract. And the more contracts you're working at the same time, the more important it is to program these things in. So you're not checking at the last minute on the finance contingency deadline. We should never not know by then. If there's going to be a problem, we need to know much earlier then. And it's your responsibility, especially if you're on the buyer side, to be checking in on that. Let's see here. Any more questions on that? All right, we're going to go to the next. Appraisal contingency deadline. This is the deadline by which the buyer has to terminate the contract or ask for a price reduction if the appraisal comes in low. If the appraisal is low, the buyer needs to submit an amendment to sales price. Let's see if I've got that. And a copy of the appraisal to the seller prior to the appraisal contingency deadline. Let's see if I've got that. Here we go. Amendment to sales price. So it's F713. And so if the appraisal comes in low, it's your buyer. You've gotten this hopefully prior to the appraisal contingency deadline. You fill this out. You can put the amount of the appraisal in here and send this over to the listing agent along with a copy of the appraisal. Okay. And the seller has 3 days from the date of this amendment to sales price to accept or reject or negotiate a lesser reduction in the sales price. If within 3 days the buyer and seller have not executed an amendment to the sales price, the buyer shall have an additional 3 days to terminate the contract and receive back their earnest money. If the appraisal is not received within the appraisal contingency deadline and therefore thereafter comes in low, buyer is obligated to complete the purchase at the contract price. So it's really important that we don't miss appraisal contingency deadlines, because if we do, then the buyer is really supposed to pay the difference in cash at the closing. So if the house was, you know, the sales price was $200,000 and it appraises for $175, and you don't get your appraisal back prior to the appraisal contingency deadline, if you're on the buyer side, you want to ask that listing agent if they will extend the deadline for you. They may or may not extend. You know, in the market that we're in now, many times they're not going to, because they don't want to get held up. You know, they don't want to hold their house off the market any longer than they need to. And they don't, you know, with so many buyers, you don't really have a lot of leverage. But you want to make sure you get it back prior to that date, because if you get it back after that date, then your buyer is going to be expected to come up with the extra $25,000. Now, maybe sometimes you're working with a buyer who has an extra $25,000. That's awesome. But a lot of times you're not going to be, and it's going to be a big pickle. Any questions on this? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just for all these printouts, we'll have access to all this that you're...
These are all in your GAR forms.
I mean, everything you wrote too?
No.
Because I should have screenshotted them all. I like how...
sent you a checklist.
I downloaded that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked how you had it written out, but it's okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me think about sending out.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, whenever. I just was wondering because it's kind of nice to have rather than...
Rachel, it's going to be on YouTube.
No.
What's that?
It's going to be on YouTube.
Oh, this is going to be on YouTube.
Right. Yeah, I thought maybe she had the printouts, but...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can screenshot it off YouTube.
And I have what Kim sent me too. So
the thing that I want to make sure y'all know where this is, these appraisal contingency deadlines, these are all on the finance exhibits, and it's on the second page, okay? The finance contingency deadlines on the first page, the appraisal contingencies on the second page, which brings us to something else I want you to be aware of. The appraisal contingency for FHA and VA. This is very important to understand, okay? FHA and VA loans are contingent upon appraised value, and there's no deadline, meaning that you can't say to them, hey, you need to have your appraisal back by such and such a date, or else you're gonna, you know, if it comes in after that, you're gonna have to pay full price for the home, even if it appraises less. Even if the appraisal were to come back low the day before closing, the buyer would not be obligated to make the purchase. See number 11 amendatory clause. I want someone to read this for me. Who's gonna read number 11 amendatory clause?
It is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this agreement, buyers shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of property described herein or to incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money deposits or otherwise unless buyer has been given in accordance with HUD FHA requirements, a written statement by the Federal Housing Commissioner or direct endorsement lender setting forth the appraised value of property of not less than $300,000. Buyers shall have the privilege and option of proceeding with consummation of the contract without regard to the amount of the appraised valuation. The appraised valuation is arrived at to determine the maximum mortgage the Department of Housing and Urban Development will insure. HUD does not warrant the value or condition of the property. The purchaser should satisfy himself or herself that the price and condition of the property are acceptable.
Thank you very much. And so what I want to make sure that you always notice here, and this is on the FHA contingency exhibit. So this is the first page of that has your finance contingency. The second page has this appraisal part, and you need to fill in the sales price here. And so if you have an offer that goes out with an original sales price and then you have a counter offer, you're going to need to redo this with the new sales price. Does that make sense? You can't just put contract price because the underwriter is going to make you redo this. So this just needs to always reflect the purchase price on the purchase and sale agreement. Does that make sense? And so again, at any point, if the appraisal comes back on an FHA or VA, there's no deadline for it to get back. And if it comes back low at any point, the buyer has the option to ask the seller to reduce the sales price or terminate and receive their earnest money back, okay? This is the same amendatory clause. This is just on the VA loan. It's almost the exact same except for you don't have to fill in the purchase price on it. Not if that makes sense to you.
Kim, may I add something on the amendatory clause? The thing that you want to be careful about, and Kim would see it after it was done, is that if you're countering back and forth, that in some way that you change that amendatory clause in a special step to read the actual sales price that's agreed upon.
Right.
Because let's say you started low and you started at $295 and you never changed that. Well, you've just obligated your buyer to, if you ended at 300, that if it didn't appraise for greater than if it appraised at $295, they have to pay $5,000 out of pocket. So just be careful on that.
Very good. All right.
So what if the amendatory clause is left blank? If there is no
that's not good
in there, what
it has to be filled in.
It's not, because then they have to buy it no matter what it appraises at.
And the underwriters are going to require that to be filled in. They'll come back and say, hey, this needs to either be changed to the sales price if you've got it low on there and nobody happened to notice. They won't let you get away with having it blank.
Okay, but if it's FHA or VA, if it's if this doesn't apply to FHA and VA, meaning that, you know, they don't have any deadline on appraisals, then does it matter if the mandatory clause is filled in?
Yes, this is part of the FHA and VA exhibit. You're always going to have an exhibit attached for any type of financing that you do. And this isn't saying that if there's not going to be an appraisal, there's going to be an appraisal. There's just no deadline as to when it has to come in.
Right, but for FHA and VA, the appraisal, in order for them to approve the loan, the appraisal has to come in at the purchase price.
Yes.
So they're not going to approve a loan where the appraisal comes in less than the purchase price. So I'm sorry, I'm just not
The
understanding.
buyer won't be obligated to purchase, right? The
Right,
buyer
but
will have the right to ask for a reduction in sales price.
That's why I'm not understanding the amendatory clause, because if FHA and VA are saying they're not approving a loan less than if the
this is
appraisal is
telling the
less than the purchase, huh?
So this is telling the seller, hey, seller, by the way, this house has to appraise for this much or the buyer doesn't have to buy it. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure, because I'm still thinking that FHA and VA aren't going to approve if it's less than the appraised value.
Yes, and
Well,
this is where this spells that out in writing.
They could. Trina, I was in mortgage banking for 29 years. They could, because you've got three choices. This says that they don't have to buy it if they can't come to a meeting of the minds as what it appraised. So they can either terminate the contract based on this, or the seller could say, okay, I'm going to lower the sales price, and you do an amendment to the sales price. Or the buyer could say, I will pay the difference. I will, if it appraised at $295, I want to pay $5,000 more. I've seen all things happen.
Yes, buyer shall have the privilege and option of proceeding with the consummation of the contract without regard to the amount of the appraised valuation.
Right. Their loan is based on the sales price or the appraised value, whichever is less.
Okay, so basically this prevents it from falling out of contract based on appraised value. So meaning that the buyer will have the option to still continue with the contract, or as it says, consummate the contract based on whatever amount they say that they don't want to pay more than.
Right. They have three options.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sale or lease of buyer's property contingency. This is the deadline, and I'm going to pull up that form again. So this is the deadline by which the buyer has to sell or lease their current property. If the property is not sold or leased by this date, the contract will terminate. So this is an exhibit that you're going to want to attach if the buyer has a house to sell, okay? And this agreement is contingent upon the following on or before. You can put, you know, whatever date you want that to be, if you want it to be the closing date of this house. And then it talks about a kick-out clause. A kick-out clause. Seller may continue to market the property. If another offer is received, they may ask the first buyer to remove their contingency. If the first buyer cannot remove their contingencies, seller may terminate contract and go with the second buyer. So that's on this exhibit right here. You can choose either a kick-out clause or it's not subject to a kick-out clause. But you want to make sure you have this if you're wanting the contract to be contingent upon the buyer selling their property, okay? Questions on that? Closing disclosure deadline. So this deadline is not mentioned in the purchase and sale agreement. It's a TRID rule that applies to all transactions where the buyer is getting a loan. The closing disclosure must be acknowledged by the buyer at least 3 business days prior to closing. Saturdays do count as a business day for these purposes. Questions? All right, closing date and possession. If seller is not giving possession at closing, you're going to need to attach a temporary occupancy agreement to your contract. It's customary in Georgia for the buyer to allow the seller 2 to 3 days after the closing to vacate the property. Otherwise, the seller is essentially being asked to move out of the property before they receive any money. Buyer or seller may unilaterally extend the contract up to 8 days. Or actually, before we go to that, I want to show you this. I want to show you this form. 219. Here's the temporary occupancy agreement. So if the seller is staying in after closing, you want to fill in how many days here and what time they're going to be out. This says that the seller is going to provide the buyer with one set of keys to the property, and that's usually at the time of closing. And then when the buyer takes possession, the seller turns over all the remaining keys. The other important thing I want to mention on here is number 10. If seller does not timely vacate property by the end of the temporary occupancy period, seller shall be deemed to be a tenant at sufferance, shall be unlawfully holding over, shall be subject to being evicted, and shall pay buyer a per-day rent during the period in which seller is holding over in the amount of blank per day for each day after the end of the temporary occupancy period that seller remains in the property. Michelle may want to comment on this, but I've heard a lot of agents say that it's good to put a higher amount in there to make this more expensive than staying in a hotel, so that the buyer actually is motivated, you know, or the seller is motivated to vacate that property when they're supposed to vacate.
I agree, Kim. You want to make it painful.
Right, at least $200, not 50, not 100, like something that's like, hey, we got to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
They're not like, I'll pay the extra money. They won't have time to evict me. No big deal. All right. Buyer or seller may unilaterally extend the contract, this up to 8 days. This is about the closing date, upon notice to the other party given prior to closing. All right. So, let's see. What is that number? F270. So this is something that you might need. Let's say that the lender hasn't been able to close on time. You know, they're having trouble getting their side done, or for some reason the seller, there's some sort of a title issue. This is the form you're going to want to make sure that you submit to the other side prior to the closing date. Notice is given this date of blah, 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 in accordance with the provision. Okay. Buyer or seller, so whomever you're working for, you want to check one of these, hereby gives notice to the other parties that the closing date is extended for 8 days. Unilateral, what does that mean, people? I want an answer.
One-sided.
That's right, one-sided.
One-sided.
So when you send this over, who needs to sign it?
Well, it's extending it.
Just your side, right? So either the buyer can send this over or the seller can send this over, and they're doing this and the other party has no say. They have no, there's nothing they can do about it, if that makes sense. Now, there are caveats as to what is allowed, and that's on here. So, seller cannot satisfy valid title objections, excluding liens, judgments, and deeds that can be satisfied for the payment of money. So let's say there's something that has come up on the title and there is a lien on the home and the seller needs to pay off this lien before they can give clear title to the buyer. They don't have the money for it yet, and they're not going to have the money for it until after closing. Well, guess what? You can't use this form. You can't use a unilateral. At that point, you've got to go to the buyer side and you've got to get them to agree to extend the closing out. Does that make sense? You're not just going to shoot over a unilateral on them. You've got to get them to agree to extend the closing so your seller has time to get that money. Okay? Title objections which do not prevent seller from conveying good and marketable title to the property. Buyer's mortgage lender, if any, including in all cash transactions, or the closing attorney cannot fulfill their respective obligations by the date of closing due to no fault of buyer. So that's a reason that you could extend. Or buyer has not received required estimates or disclosures, and buyer is prohibited from closing under federal regulations. So any of those are acceptable reasons to extend out the closing unilaterally. Now you can always extend if both parties agree, but these are the only terms under which you can extend without the other party agreeing, okay? Any questions on that?
Kim, tell them it's a one-time wild card.
I like it. It's a one-time wild card. That's like an Uno. Is that right, Michelle? Uno? That's right. I like it.
One time only.
All right. Here's the loan process. So we're going to step away from the transaction for a minute. We're going to talk about the loan process. And then we're going to come back to our checklists and go from essentially the beginning to the end of what happens during the contract process, okay? So buyer shows up, they call the lender, they get what's called a pre-qualification letter. This might mean that they've called the lender said, hey, how much money do you make? Do you have a job? How much money do you make? I'm going to pull your credit. So not a lot of information is needed to get this pre-qualification letter. The buyer is, after that, the buyer is going to submit their loan application to the processor. This means they've actually filled out paperwork and turned it in. That's what we want to hear, that they've actually submitted a loan application, okay? And then the buyer is going to receive a loan estimate from the lender. This is the numbers that the lender gives them. Hey, here's your interest rate. Here's how much cash you're going to bring to closing. Here are the terms of your loan. Buyer is going to sign an intent to proceed. Some folks, if they're further outside the perimeter, just call these disclosures, okay? But basically, these forms, the intent to proceed or the disclosures, are what's needed by the lender in order for the lender to order the appraisal. So we're very interested in whether or not the buyer has signed these, because if they haven't signed them, the appraisal hasn't been ordered and we're not going down the track yet. Does that make sense? So when we get to our checklists in a little bit, this is something that I check on every time, even if, especially if I'm on the seller side, but even if I'm on the seller side, just to make sure the buyers put in their loan paperwork, sign the intent to proceed, and that means we're on our way, okay? Processor is going to submit the file to the underwriter. The underwriter is going to review the file and they may request more documents. So the underwriter is the person at the lender's office who has the list, the checklist, if you will, for every single type of loan program. They're going through all those documents and they're, you know, checking it twice, going to find out if you're naughty or nice, right? They might go through these and they might have more questions, at which point they might ask for more documents. So if they do have everything they need, they come back with what's called a conditional approval, okay? And a conditional approval means, hey, the loan's approved, but we want to see this list of conditions, or some people call them STIPs, prior to closing, okay? But a conditional approval is what we are looking for by the time our finance contingency is up. We want a conditional approval, so write down that term.
What are some examples of that, of STIPs or other things?
They're going to want to see a final, like they're going to want, they're going to want a final credit check. They're going to want to make sure that you're still employed, you know, and there could be other verifications and things that they need. So some things come from the lender and some things they might ask the buyer for, okay?
So the conditional approval is not the same as like the pre-approval?
Nope.
Okay.
This is way more documentation. So the pre-approval, well, let's put it this way. I'm sorry, I thought you said pre-qualification. So a person can be pre-qualified, and then before they purchase a property, sometimes they submit all of their documents to the underwriter and they will come back with a pre-approval. But if you look at the documentation, the letter, it will say this is a pre-approval letter subject to title, appraisal of the subject property, and it'll list some other things too that they're still going to want to see in order to approve the loan, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So with the conditional, that means they've already received those things.
That's right. Well,
Okay.
it means they've received all the documentation and that they want to see a couple of more conditions before they give the final approval. And the final approval, you're usually going to get that just a couple days before closing because of the last minute checks that they're going to do on credit and on employment. Okay.
So would I want a lender to give me a conditional approval or a pre-approval?
Either one, because they're both just about the same.
Okay.
It's about the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pre-approval just usually means you've gotten all your documentation in and it's been reviewed for an underwriter before you found the property.
Okay.
That's the only difference, really. But they're still going to want to see last minute conditions prior to, you know, giving you your final approval or clear to close.
Gotcha. I have a question.
Yes.
So during that conditional approval period, if there are additional stipulations that exceed the 21-day contingency, what happens then? Do you have to, what happens then?
Well, typically you're getting just a conditional approval prior to the finance contingency period. You're not going to have your final approval. Hopefully, and I hate to say hope in this business, but hopefully all of those conditions come back and they are acceptable to the lender and you get your final approval. Hopefully you should not have anything come back that will get your loan denied after your conditional approval.
Okay.
I'm not saying it could never happen, because I've learned in this business, never say never, right? But you know, if everything is as it should be and everything is as one has represented it to the lender, and one has not said anything that's possibly untrue that could be found to be untrue by subsequent documentation that's requested, all of those conditions or steps coming in should just be checking off the list for the final approval. It would be extremely rare that you would get a loan denial after you've had a conditional approval. Any more questions on that? Starting to get serious, isn't it? All right. Now, appraisal comes back at value or not. So, you know, when we asked them if they were going to, we asked them, and we're going to go over these steps in a minute, we're going to ask them to order the appraisal. One of the things that I do, and Michelle probably does this too, is let's say you're working with a seller and the appraisal comes back and the seller asks you, hey, what did my house appraise for? Well, that's kind of a tricky question, isn't it? Why do they want to know? Why is it any of their business? Really, you know, if you think about it, they're just wanting to win extra, right? Or if and you don't have really a winning answer here, right? If you say, unless it's like, hey, it came back at the purchase price, because you don't want to have a house that sold for 200 and the seller, hey, what did it appraise for? 210. You know, they're going to be mad. So what I always tell them is this. I always say the appraisal came back at value. And I'll say that that's the only thing that the buyer side tells us. Well, can we get a copy of that? No, I'm sorry, we cannot. The appraisal is the property of the buyer. They're the ones that paid for it. All they'll say is we appraised at value. And that's great news, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, because that means we're moving on to the next part of the process. So that to me is the canned answer that I give when a seller tries to trick me into telling them what a property appraised for. I would just say, I don't do it. Do you do it, Michelle? Do you tell them?
No, never. No, I would answer exactly the same way you did. It supported their loan, so we get to move forward.
Right. Yep. See, they're wanting. It's so funny. It's like, you already won. Now let go. It's okay. You know, your house. You have your house under contract. This is good. You don't need to win anymore. All right. So, underwriter reviews the file again for the final approval or to clear to close. So those are the magic words to use when you're calling up a lender and you're trying to find out if the loan's like 100% ready to go. We're going to say, hey, do you have the final approval or do you have the clear to close? Okay, that's the terminology that we use. And that's after all those steps or conditions have come back to the underwriter. They've reviewed it and then they give the final, you know, this final sign off. All right. Then at that point, the lender is going to send the closing disclosure to the buyer. So that's just the final numbers, you know, for the buyer. Okay. The buyer, once they have that closing disclosure, they can wire their funds to the closing attorney's office. Now, I know you all probably know this from all of your classes, but I'm just going to be an extra person to say, we don't ever give wiring instructions to the buyer. You all know this, right? Nod your head. So if somebody emails them to me, I do not send them along. We have a letter that goes out to our buyers and we say, hey buyer, here's the phone number at the closing attorney's office. Please contact them. They're going to send you wiring instructions securely. You will never receive wiring information from us. There's been a lot of fraud and spoofing where stuff comes out and it looks like it came from you. And what the fraudsters will do is you'll send it in the past, if you send an email with the wiring instructions to your buyer, they would come right behind you like 5 minutes later and send an email that looks just like yours. Hey, I'm sorry, that was a wrong account. Please send it to this place instead. And folks have sent their money. And the thing about wires is they're not protected under FDIC. And so they're not guaranteed, you know, if it's gone, it's gone. And I've heard that it goes bounce out of the USA, you know, and so just don't ever be involved in passing along wire instructions. Those need to be sent directly from the attorney to the buyer every time. All right, let's see. At the end of the buyer sends the package to the closing attorney. That's just our term for the loan documents, okay? Once everything's clear to close with the attorney, they send out, with the attorney and the lender, they send out the CD, and then the lender's gonna send the package to the closing attorney. And at the end of the closing, the lender is gonna fund the loan. Sometimes they will send the wire for the loan like the night before or the day before. Sometimes there's something called the funding number that once the closing attorney faxes or emails all the documents that are signed back to the lender, then they give them a funding number and then the funds can be released. So either way, the funding happens at the very end of the closing. All right, now we're ready to do a buyer side transaction. That's a lot.
Kim, it's 2:30 now. May we take a 10-15 minute break?
Sure, which one is it?
Let's do 10 minutes.
15.
Who's asking for 15 out there?
Okay, we always do 15.
Okay, 15, then we'll just finish up at 4:35.
Okay.
I'm kidding. Look at the faces. Alicia is not.
No.
Okay, so before we go on break, you know what the drill is, correct? Big smiles, and let me start taking screenshots.
Sorry.
Okay. All right, Conrad. See, I said it right this time. Okay. I got a few more to go.
Michelle, I'm going to mute myself and I'm just going to leave my screen on where it is, okay?
Okay. All right. And I'm done. All right. It is 2:30. Come back at 4:45 for your next smiles. Thank you. Can you everybody hear me? All right, how was your break? We're going to start taking screenshots, so I hope everyone's here. My watch says 2:45. Does everybody else agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, I know the people that are on here are going to agree. It's the ones that weren't on here that might not. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start taking screenshots. Big smile. Here we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Another big thank you. Hey, Triella, smile. Beautiful smile. All right. I think I'm almost to the end. Keisha Welch, smile for me. Okay, got it. All right, Kim, take it away.
Alrighty then, we're back. So now that we've gone through all that, we are ready to start our buyer side transaction. I've put these in several categories: after binding agreement date, after due diligence, and then before the closing. So let's get started. So after the binding agreement date, excuse me, you're going to review the contract and request any missing items. You want to verify that the contract has HOA contact information and co-op contact information. And I want to talk about that for a second. If there's an HOA that's required, what I always look for, let me see if I can make this easier for you to see. You want to have this community association disclosure exhibit attached to the contract. In fact, I think they've got a new version of this now, but the important thing is here. See this? Contact information for the association. Don't have a condo association disclosure exhibit with this information blank. Anytime you look at a contract that has a condo or a community association, make sure that this is filled in. If it's not, reach out to the listing agent or your seller and make sure that that gets filled in as soon as possible, because the last thing that you want is for nobody to realize this isn't filled in, and for some reason the attorney not get to getting in touch with the HOA until the last minute, and there be some sort of a holdup because you don't have this letter. Any property that has a mandatory HOA is a letter from the HOA stating how much the dues are, where they're paid, and whether or not they're current is going to be required for closing in order to give good and marketable title. So any delay in getting that letter could possibly delay your closing. That's why this information here is so important. And then I want to bring up another thing on your purchase and sale. about having contact information. So down here, bear with me, co-op contact information. I always want to make sure when I check a contract that, and you want to make sure at the beginning that you've actually got contact information for the other agent. Let's say I'm the buying agent and we've got a contract and the listing broker, what's missing here? You see that? The listing broker's email address is missing here. Do you know what that means? That means that sending an email to give notice to this listing broker is not a valid form of notification according to the contract. That's a big deal, because if you need to send over a termination or anything like that, if you send it to an email address and it's not listed on the contract, it might not be considered valid, and your buyer's notice may not be considered valid, and they could lose their earnest money if it was having something to do with earnest money. So if you ever see that and you want to be communicating with email with the other side, if you ever see that this is missing, I will go back and do an amendment to the contract and make sure that that other broker's contact information, especially their email address, is on there, so we have a valid way to give notice. I've seen contracts come over with nothing but the other agent's name and brokerage. I mean, that's a dangerous way to write a contract. You've got essentially no way to give notice until you do an amendment. So does that make sense to everyone? Great. Let's see here. All right, set a reminder in your calendar of all the contract deadlines. We've talked about what those are before. Your binding agreement date, earnest money, due diligence, finance appraisal, closing disclosure, closing date. Put those all in your calendar. If the buyer is selling their home and there's a contingency on that, put that in your calendar too, and put a reminder a couple of days before so you don't miss any of those deadlines. Send an email to your buyer and listing agent with a reminder of important dates. So we just send this out as an email, but we want everybody to remember that everyone to be in agreement on what the deadlines are for this contract. So here's the reminder of important dates form. It's F264. Okay, and you can send this out to all parties, or at least the other agent, and to your client, and fill in all of these deadlines on here so everybody's aware and everybody's on the same page what the deadlines are for the contract. And we always do this up front when we get in touch with the other agent and our client, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Okay, F264. Oops. All right. Order the home inspection. So if this is your buyer and we've gone under contract, many folks will give their buyer a list of 3 home inspectors to choose from. They can choose one and schedule it. Some agents will just use their preferred inspector and schedule it for the buyer. There's always a risk, though, if you tell the buyer who they need to use and don't give them more choices. If they're unhappy with something that happens, they could blame you. It's a lot better if you give them options to choose from as far as the inspector goes. So we've ordered the home inspection. We want to get the CBS code from the listing agent. The CBS code is a call before showing code. This is a code that will allow any contractor who has a lockbox key to access the lockbox. So appraisers will typically have a lockbox key. Inspectors will have a lockbox key, and hopefully your termite person is going to have a lockbox key. And the thing is, they can't access just any property because they're not realtors. So they have to have permission from that particular property. And so that's what the CBS code is. It gives a person who has it permission to enter that property. Does that make sense? This is found, thank you for nodding, that was good. This is found in Supra. When you're on the listing side and you assign your lockbox, the CBS code is listed there. So if you're on the listing side, that's how you find out what your CBS code is so you can give it to the other side. And you probably want to get this because if you're on the buyer's side and the house is in, let's say, Villa Rica, you might not want to show up bright and early at 9 a.m. to open that door for the inspector. You might want to show up, you know, a little bit later or for the tail end of the inspection. And this allows you, allows the inspector to go ahead and open the door. As far as being there for the home inspection, there's no right way or wrong way. I would say probably as a new agent, most new agents are going to go and they're going to attend the entire home inspection. So it's a learning process. You know, more experienced agents, probably Courtney Newton, she probably doesn't go to her inspections, but you know, there's some agents who've been in the business a very long time. Debbie Sonnenschein, I don't know if y'all have heard of her, in the business over 30 years. She said, Kim, I always go to my inspections. I'm like, Debbie, why do you always go to your inspection? She's like, because you lose them at the inspection. She said, I want to be there. I want to hear what that inspector says. I want to be able to ask questions, to steer the conversation, and to make sure that my buyers don't get scared and that I provide information that they need. So she feels like it's important for her to be there at every home inspection so that she can control the process and see what's going on. So there's no right way or wrong way. It's just everybody has their own way of doing things. And an inspection is going to take about 3 hours, maybe a little bit more, maybe an extra hour if there's another kitchen or something else like that on the property, maybe just 2 or 2.5 if it's a condo. And some buyers want to go there and be there for the whole thing. Some buyers might just want to go for the last 30-minute wrap up, and some buyers might not want to go at all. It all just depends on who they are.
Now, is the CBS code, is that the 4-digit code that when you order your Supra, they usually ask what 4-digit code you want to use?
No, it's a 7-digit code, and it's assigned each time you assign a lockbox to a property.
Gotcha. And I would just call them to get that information?
You would just log in like you log into Supra?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, are you on the listing side or the selling side right now?
The listing side.
So if this is your listing and you have a lockbox and you know the number on the back of that lockbox, you're going to go into Supra and you're going to type in the lockbox number, and it's going to give, and when you assign it to a property, it's going to give you a CBS code.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Notify the listing agent of the inspection time and date. I love this part. I want to let you know that notify really does mean notify. So we're going to go to 8A. Who's going to read this for me? 8A right here. Is that big enough? Hold on. I can make it bigger. 8A. Somebody read, not me.
Upon prior notice to seller, buyer and/or buyer's representatives shall have the right to enter the property at buyer's expense and at reasonable times, including immediately prior to closing, to inspect, examine, test, appraise, and survey property.
Pause. Okay. So this is saying that the buyer has the right to inspect the property, and they have the right to enter the property at the buyer's expense and at reasonable times, including immediately prior to closing for any inspections. So what that means is if we've given prior notice as the buyer, if we call up the seller side and ask them if we can come in on Tuesday at 9 a.m. and they tell us no, technically they are in breach of contract. I mean, we don't whip that out as a hammer on our first go around, but sometimes it can get crazy trying to get into a property either at the beginning for an inspection or sometimes at the end. So what I want you to know is that if you've given notice and it's a reasonable time, of course, reasonable time, you know, that's always up to somebody's interpretation, right? But they should be letting you in the property. So usually if I go and I try to schedule an inspection, I'm like, no, we're sorry, the children are napping them. I'll go back and try to schedule it. You know, I'll go back and try to get another time. But if there still seems to be a problem on a second and third attempt, and you might have this come up, that's when I would say to the listing agent, I would say, well, as I'm sure you're aware, you know, the seller has agreed to allow the buyer access to the property at reasonable times upon notice. I'm sure most of us would agree that Tuesday at 9 a.m. is a reasonable time. Will you please let your seller know this and get back to this on me, because, you know, they've agreed to that in the contract. And then if you can't get any, you know, if you still are having problems on it, you could say something like, well, I'm sure you've discussed with your seller that, you know, they agreed when they signed the contract to allow us access to the property at reasonable times, you know, and that if they don't allow us access to the property, then they would technically be in breach. Can you please discuss this with your broker and get back to us so that we can get in to see the property? Okay, I just want you to have that in your toolbox. And like I said, we don't pull that hammer out on the first, you know, go around. But if it starts to get crazy and for some reason, sometimes you'll have a situation and it could be anything. There's maybe something wrong with the seller or I don't know what, or they become very unreasonable. And you might have trouble getting in. And it can seem like because the other agent has a license number beginning in 1, which means they were licensed in the 90s, that they should know what they're talking about, or they should be more in control of their client, but they're not. And so this is a way for you to explain to them that you are allowed to come in there to inspect, and they do need to make the property available to you with notice and at a reasonable time. And then just the next sentence, please, someone.
Seller shall cause all utilities, systems, and equipment to be on so that buyer may complete all inspections.
Okay, so when sellers are talking about getting their utilities shut off, they shouldn't be getting them shut off the day before closing. Okay? They need to leave those utilities on through the day of closing so that the buyer is able to come in and do a final walkthrough. Does that make sense? So that's all right here in the contract. If you have a problem, you know, with somebody saying they're going to get utilities shut off, this is the proof that the seller really should have it on in their name up until the time of closing. So if you're closing, you know, it's going to usually be through that whole day regardless of what time you're closing. All right, I think that's all on that line. All right. All right. Notify listing agent of inspection time and date. So we're going to let the listing agent know that we're coming, and hopefully they don't give us a hard time, right? All right. After binding agreement date, review the contract and request any missing items. Did I just do this one? Okay, verify the contract has HOA info and co-op contact. So order termite inspection if required. Order the termite inspection if required / desired by the buyer. All right, so let's talk about termites for a minute here. When your buyer is doing an inspection of the property, they're more than welcome to have a termite inspection done at the same time as their home inspector is going to be coming out to the property. Some buyers will want to do this. Some buyers don't care about doing this. If there's a termite bond on the property, a buyer may not, you know, want to spend the extra $45 because a bond should mean that if the property gets termites during that covered period, the termite company is going to come out and repair any damage. So let's go into that a little bit more. A termite letter is not required unless it's in the STIPs or unless it's a VA loan. So this is what I want you all to remember. All VA loans are going to require a termite letter, okay? All VA loans will require a termite letter. That's also known as an official Georgia wood infestation report. And this will need to be submitted to underwriting before the loan can be approved. And the seller is required to provide the termite letter. Now, all agents don't know this. So if you are working for a seller and you get a contract over and it has a VA exhibit attached, know that your seller is going to be required to order a termite letter and to pay that $45 or whatever it costs to get this letter done. And I want someone to read this. This is a good long one. Who wants to read a long thing?
I can read it.
All right.
The Veterans Administration has certain rules and regulations limiting the items for which a buyer can be charged relating to the closing of the VA loan. Buyer should consult with buyer's mortgage lender to determine how buyer may be affected by these rules and regulations. Notwithstanding any other seller contribution, seller shall provide buyer at or before the date dated within 90 days prior.
At or before the closing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Closing at seller's cost with an official Georgia Wood Infestation Inspection Report meeting the requirements of Georgia law and dated within 90 days prior to the date of closing, indicating that the property is free from infestation from termites and other wood-destroying organisms.
Whew, pause there for a minute. That was a long sentence, okay? So we're just gonna break that down.
I'm sorry, it's so hard to read off the
Oh, you're doing great. It's just like, wow, that's, I was afraid we were gonna keep on going with that sentence till the end of the page. So basically what this is saying is that notwithstanding any other seller contribution, seller shall provide buyer at or before the closing in itself with this letter. So sellers agreed to pay $1,000 of closing costs. All right, now they have to buy a termite letter. And they're saying, well, I'm gonna take that $45 out of the $1,000 that I'm paying as closing costs. The answer is no, Mr. Seller, you're not doing that. The contract says that this is notwithstanding that amount. Does that make sense? So they're paying for the termite letter in addition to. The other thing I want to point out here is this. So it's also saying, let me get my little pointer. This is fun. All right. Seller shall provide buyer at or before closing at seller's cost, this letter. Well, here's the thing. At or before the closing, the seller can't be providing this letter at the closing. You know why? Because there's a loan on the property and the lender is going to want to see a copy of this letter in order to complete the underwriting requirements in order to approve the loan. Okay, so here's some place where you might have to educate the listing agent when you're working on the buyer side. When you have a VA loan, you want to be asking on the buyer side, you know, when you're, let's say 30 days from closing, hey, just want to check and see when we're going to get a copy of that termite letter. And if they say, well, we're going to provide it to you at closing, this is a chance for you to educate that other agent and say, well, I understand that the contract says that it can be provided at closing. However, the underwriter is going to need to review and approve that letter prior to closing. So it would be beneficial if we could get that at least 3 weeks before closing so that they'll have time to do that and the loan won't get delayed, therefore delaying our closing. Okay, that's what you want to convey to them, is it's not okay to have this thing at the last minute. It needs to be there early in time for this thing to go through underwriting. And the other thing that I want to talk about is, let's see if it's on the next page. Yes, so the VA will accept termite letters that are 90 days old or less. If the letter is older than 90 days, you'll need to get a new one, okay? And here's the thing. Once that letter comes in, you want to look at it and see what it says. Once you receive it, watch out for this earth to wood contact. If it says earth to wood contact, the VA is not going to accept that letter, okay? They're going to kick it back and they're going to say this earth to wood contact is going to have to be remediated before we're going to approve this loan, all right? And usually what the earth to wood contact means, and I'm going to pull up a termite letter here. All right, so here's our termite letter. We just got this back. Look at this. Following conditions conducive to infestation were found at the time of inspection. Wood to ground contact at posts, siding, and landscape timbers. This is bad if you get this back. What this means is what's going to need to happen before this can go back to underwriting is the seller is going to need to call a contractor to come out to the house. This post means the deck posts. So, and this is typical, deck posts are going into the ground with no cement around them. So they're going to have someone come over to the house, dig around the deck posts, put in cement all the way to the bottom. Now, this one's got it at the siding too. So apparently the siding all around their house is within, I'm not sure how many inches it is. I'm not sure if it's 8 or 10, but if your siding is with a certain amount of inches of the ground, you're gonna have the seller have it removed up to whatever that level is all the way around the house. That's starting to get serious, right? They're starting to essentially ruin the outside of the house for a buyer who hasn't paid for their house yet. It's starting to get real, right? But that's what's going to have to be done. And it's talking about landscape timbers here. They just had some stuff outside. So look, they give you a graph. Here's your siding that's with below the amount they allow, that's lower than they allow. here's your patio, and here's where some timbers are laying. So these are all the places that they're gonna have to come out and remediate, and then you're gonna be able to get one that's clear here. So all of that stuff needs to happen before you get a clear letter that can be sent to underwriting. So can you see why you don't even want to wait? You don't want to wait 1 week before closing to get this letter. Does that make sense? You get this letter 1 week before closing, your closing is delayed because there's almost no way that that seller is going to be able to get somebody out to the house, do these repairs, get the termite people back to the house, get the letter to underwriting, get the underwriting to review it and sign off on it and get the package to the attorney within 5 days of closing. It's not going to happen. So that's why 30 days out, if there's a termite letter, typically that's when I'm trying to ask the other agent, hey, when can we get that termite letter? And that's why the answer right before closing is not sufficient. Does that make sense? All right, very exciting termite stuff. All right. Watch out for earth to wood contact. It's okay if it says earth to wood contact, lumber appears to be pressure treated. So it's so funny reading these letters because you'll be holding your breath. You're like, earth to wood contact, does it say anything else? And if it says lumber appears to be pressure treated, you're like, yes. And if it doesn't, you'll be like, So that's, if the lumber's been pressure treated, you're good. There's nothing to worry about with the VA. Also, just want to mention that termite letters are only required on VA loans, but on an FHA loan, if your special stipulations state that the seller is going to provide a free and clear termite letter, and you give this and you have a letter that goes to the FHA and it has the earth to wood contact, it's the same thing. They're going to make you remediate. So just so you're aware of that. Any questions on that? No termite questions? Wow. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything on this page. All right. After the binding agreement.
Kim, I have a question on the termite letter.
Yes.
Can you go back to the termite letter?
Yes.
Okay, so lower down, the findings were all no. For active and previous.
Right.
It says, were any areas inaccessible? Yes. And then it says where.
That's pretty common.
Right. But, and then underneath that now it says the following conditions were conducive to infestation. So if all those things were listed for infestation, shouldn't it have somewhere been on previous as a yes?
No, this is just saying that this could possibly cause an infestation in the future.
Okay.
So it's got foam insulation, and they're saying
so what's concerning? Okay.
Yeah, these are our concerns that you could possibly get termites in the future.
Okay, so where it says wood to ground contact, but it doesn't say, you know, lumber, pressure treated or whatever. I mean, how would you handle that? Is that just like something to be aware of?
How would I handle this?
Yeah,
that's a very good question. So if I'm on the seller side and we get our letter back and it says this, I'm going to have to talk to the seller and say, hey seller, guess what? We've got earth to wood contact. The VA is going to reject this letter. If you want to close this house, you know, if you want to sell this house and have them close this loan, we're going to need to get this remediated. We need to call a contractor and have them come out and remediate the contact at the post, remediate the contact at the siding, and remove the landscape timbers.
So even though there's no active, no previous infestation, just that concern is enough for them to reject?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, and this is what I call termite 101. So I definitely want you guys to understand this, because sometimes folks, they don't know it, and they'll get the termite letter that's required and then they'll just shoot it off to the lender without even looking at it. You have to look at these things and see what they say, because if you don't, the underwriter's going to look at it, but guess what? They're going to look at it 5 days before closing, mark my words. You know, and that's when it's going to come back right before you're trying to close, and it will delay your closing. So try to get these ordered at least 30 days out. 3 weeks somewhere in there, so that you have time, if this does happen, to get it fixed and get a new letter and get it to underwriting so that closing's not delayed. It's just a little bit of thinking ahead.
And you said this is only for VA, not conventional or FHA?
Correct, unless on FHA, if the stipulations in the contract say that the seller is going to provide a termite letter, then this applies as well.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who knows the difference? I want to go back to this for 1 second. Who knows the difference between a termite letter and a termite bond? Who wants to tell the class the difference?
I think the bond is the actual service that they have on the home. Is it the traps that they put in the ground?
It's a guarantee. So
Yes.
termite letter says that, hey, we've been out to the property and today it does not have termites. Okay, that's a termite letter, official Georgia wood infestation report. A termite bond says, hi, we are guaranteeing that there are not going to be termites on this this house will have no termite infestation for the period of this bond, which is a year. And if it does get termites, we're going to come out and we're going to either retreat, which is called a retreat bond, or we're going to retreat it and repair any damage, which is called a retreat and repair bond. So a bond is different than a letter. And a letter is typically going to cost about $45. Some can be free. Terminix will charge $150 for these things. It's outrageous, but that's how much a termite letter should cost. But if you have to get a termite bond, most of the time you're not going to be able to get a guarantee that the house isn't going to have termites without the termite company having treated the property, okay? And this is a common FSBO mistake. I think we're going to talk about it a little later in my presentation, but what will happen is if you don't have a termite bond on the house and you've promised that you're going to have a termite bond to the buyer, you're going to have the property treated in order to get that bond, and that's usually the cheapest you'll ever see them is like $499 and up. So they can be like from $499 to $699. So it's important to know the difference, especially when you're asking for something or promising something in your special stipulations. All right.
Wait, question.
Yes.
Which is obviously the termite bond is better, but is the termite letter acceptable if the property has been treated?
Well, it depends on for what purposes. So if it's a VA loan, then the termite letters, the official Georgia wood infestation report is what's required. Okay. Usually as far as a bond goes, the only time that's required is if someone has promised it in the special steps. Like a lot of times you'll see in special steps, seller agrees to provide buyer 1 year termite bond at no cost to buyer from date of closing. Okay, that's the only time it would be required. Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does the house have to have had termite and be treated to get a bond?
It doesn't have to have had termites, but it has to have been treated. I've never met a termite company that's going to give a bond on a house without doing a treatment first. Does that make sense? They're not going to guarantee it's not going to have termites if they haven't treated.
So not necessarily must have had a termite before.
No, it doesn't have to have termites, but no company is going to give a bond on a home that they have not treated.
Gotcha.
Because they want to make sure that it's not going to get termites, right?
True.
All right.
One last question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
If the house is already being treated with a service, obviously this can be included in the sale of the house, right? The balance, is that something that can be rolled over to the owner even though it's paid? Or, I mean, that might be a little too technical, but I'm just
really
asking.
hear you. I apologize.
What I'm asking is, if the house has already been treated by a service and
Let's say the house has a termite bond on it.
right.
Okay.
If it already has it and it's being treated and serviced, quarterly, however, whenever it's treated,
Sure.
and the house is being sold and that rolled over to the new owners.
Stop. Rewind. I couldn't hear that last part. You cut out again.
Don't worry about it. Forget about it.
Are you sure?
Carry on.
You
Yeah, it's
wanna
okay.
Type your question into the chat. Maybe
I'll do that.
y'all can
Okay.
let me know a little bit later. When we go through the seller part, we're going to come back to termites, and maybe we could talk about it then. Does that sound good? Okay, great. All right. So we're going to enter the transaction into KW Command. We're going to upload our contract. We're going to fill out the commissions tab and submit. We're going to verify that the earnest money has been received. Make a copy of that earnest money and send it to the lender and attorney if it's a check. Send the contract to the attorney and the lender and make sure that they have each other's contact information. Send a copy of the commission agreement to the attorney. So I love these. Hold on. I should have given myself an F number so I could find it. Bear with me. This is a very important form here. It's called Make Sure You Get Paid form. Instructions to closing attorney. And the F number is F255. And I just want to have a plug for this really quickly. Do we get paid every other Friday just for showing up? No. I want everyone to shake their head no. In real estate, we don't get a paycheck just for showing up, do we? We only get paid when something closes, right? Okay. So, class, here's a question for you. When a seller agrees to sell their home, who have they agreed to pay a commission to?
Your broker.
The listing agent. Very good. So they signed a contract with the listing agent saying, hey, listing agent, I'm going to pay you, let's say 6%. And the listing agent says, hey, I'm going to share this commission with an agent if they bring the buyer, right? So if you are an agent for the buyer, who has agreed to pay you a commission?
Listing agent. The brokerage.
The broker.
What
The
broker?
brokerage. The listing agent's broker.
The listing agent, that's right. So if you don't have this agreement here, let me get my little pointer out. Oh, it went away, hang on. It won't work. If you don't have this agreement signed by the listing agent, guess what? No one has agreed to pay you any money. Does that make sense? This is the form that says you as an agent for the buyer are going to get paid. Okay, so it's very important to get this filled out and signed by the listing agent at the beginning of the transaction. And I'm going to talk about this for a minute because I've seen some sad things happen over the course of my career that I hope you will be able to avoid. So, and just a quick thing about filling this out. So if you're on the buyer's side and it's the beginning of the transaction, it doesn't have to be the minute you submit the offer. That would be nice, but you know, either that day or the next day. You can leave this total real estate commission blank because that's going to include the listing agent's portion. That's going to be the total commission the seller's paying. You fill in your amount here. Can you see my mouse? Can you all see where that is? Okay, good. You fill in your percentage here. So if it's 3%, you leave this blank. You can put in your 3% here. Typically, the buyer's not going to be paying a commission, so you can leave this blank. If there's anything special, you can put it here. You sign it. And you send this over to the listing agent so they can sign it. Now, if there's a bonus or anything like that, then you want to make sure that that's either included here or somewhere here, that there's a bonus. And the reason I'm telling you about this is because here are some things that I've seen happen over the course of my career. I've seen where an agent did not get this signed at the beginning of the transaction. And this could happen. This is a lot easier to happen with new homes, okay? So when you sell a new home, it's very typical to see in the FMLS, 2,000 broker bonus offered to selling agent with full price offer dated prior to February 25th or whatever it is. You see that in there and you think, oh, okay, great, I'm getting this bonus. If you see that, you need to fill that out and put that on this form. What I've seen when a person hasn't filled that out and put this on this form is that they get up to they forget about the commission agreement And the thing is, in most new home contracts, it doesn't say the commission. So in about, I would say about 70% of new home contracts say nothing about the selling agent's commission in it. They have a paragraph in there about brokerage and representation, and it says something like this. In this transaction, listing agent has represented seller. Selling agent has represented buyer. Listing agent to pay selling agent commission according to a separate agreement. Do you have your separate agreement? This is that separate agreement that you need to be responsible for and send it over to that agent because they didn't have a form for you to sign. Unless, of course, they did. And sometimes, like I said, 30% of the time, your commission might be in the contract. But if it's not, you need to make sure that you get it in writing. So here's why. I've seen agents who haven't had this signed, and they get up to the closing, and they are reviewing the settlement statement, and they're like, hey, wait a second. Where's my $2,000 bonus? They said that to the listing agent. Here's the answer that I've heard before. Oh, I'm sorry. That was, the seller didn't agree to that. Well, what do you mean they didn't agree to that? I've got a copy of the FMLS printout right here that says I'm supposed to be getting $2,000. And they have said that was negotiated out at time of contract. Think about that. That was negotiated out at time of contract. That means that you didn't get it in writing. And guess what? You've got zero leverage right before closing, right? Zero. Everybody's closing on that house. The buyer's buying it, the seller's selling it, and nobody cares about your $2,000 broker bonus. In fact, you might look like a crybaby whiner for, you know, complaining about it. So the time to get this signed is at the very beginning, when everybody remembers the terms of the sale, when everybody's on good terms, when you still have leverage. At the very beginning, right after you sign that binding agreement, you send this over, this form, to the listing agent. They'll sign it, they'll send it back, no problem. The reason many times, and the reason this isn't in the GAR form now, when I was first selling real estate, the commission used to be part of the GAR form. But what would happen when the buyers and sellers started negotiating and they would get into the heat of negotiations, they would start marking out our commission like X, oh, that's going to be 2, X, that's going to be 1, you know, and they started making our paycheck a part of their negotiations. So the forms committee took that out of the contract and made it a separate agreement, which it is, between the listing agent and the agent for the buyer. And that's why you need to get this signed, to make sure that your commission amount is correct. That's the other thing. I've seen this come back where folks haven't had this signed at the very beginning, and at the end they send it over to the other agent and they're like, no, I'm sorry, it's not 3%, it's 2%. What? It says 3% in FMLS. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a typo. It said 2% in Georgia MLS. You know, and I mean, this is your payday. Like I said, we don't get paid every other Friday for just showing up. So, you know, this is a way to honor yourself and protect yourself, is to get this signed up front. Same with your buyer brokerage agreement. If you don't want them to buy a house from someone else, if you don't want them to buy a FSBO or somebody else to sell them a house at an open house, just find an agent in the office, ask them what their script is for getting a buyer agency agreement, get comfortable with saying that, and get these forms signed, because these are the things that protect you and protect you from wasting your time and not getting a paycheck. Now I will get off my soapbox. Any questions about that? All right, clear as day. Great. Let's see, verify the earnest money is received. Okay, send contract to attorney and lender. Send copy of commission agreement to the attorney. Verify that the buyer has made loan application and lender has received the intent to proceed. We talked about that. Those are the disclosures. What happens, class, after the lender has received the intent to proceed and the disclosures? What will they then do? Why do we care about this?
Is that because they issue the loan at that point?
They're getting started with the loan. What are they waiting on? What are we waiting on this piece of paper for? What will happen after they get this piece of paper? The intent.
The appraisal.
That's right, the appraisal. That's why we care about this. That's why we're saying, hey, And this is also in the checklist that I've given you that tells you when you're calling about this. Hey, have you received the intent to proceed? Once the lender has received the intent to proceed or the disclosures, they're going to order the appraisal. That's why we care about this, okay? All righty then. After the binding agreement, let's see. So once you've had the inspection, you're going to receive a copy of the inspection report. You're going to review it with your buyers. You're going to submit an amendment or not. You know, if they're wanted as is, that's good. But if you're going to do an amendment, you'll submit it to the listing agent with any repair request or request for money off the purchase price or an increase in closing costs. Any due diligence amendment must be fully executed by all parties and the binding date filled in at the bottom of the amendment prior to 11:59 p.m. on the due diligence deadline, or the buyer will have accepted the home as is. And so let me show you what one of these looks like. So here's an amendment to address concerns with property. This is if you're asking for repairs. So this needs to be filled out, and see this? This needs to be filled in at the bottom in order for this to be binding. So don't forget to bind your amendments. It's very important. All right. So we're through due diligence. Everything's good. We've gotten our amendments signed now. We're going to schedule the closing with the attorney's office. We're going to send any amendments to the attorney and the lender. If there's a price change, a closing cost change, you especially want to make sure that they get there. But because if you forget to send these amendments, then guess what? If that doesn't go to the lender, then their loan amount could be wrong. Because if they're getting a 90% loan of $100,000 versus a 90% loan now of $90,000, if you forget to send this amendment in a timely fashion, it could get through underwriting. And if you remember at the end, it's going to have to go back through underwriting, and this could delay you. So just remember, once you get through due diligence, send any amendments to the attorney and the lender. Send the buyer a closing confirmation email with directions to the attorney's office. Send the co-op a closing confirmation email with directions. I always like, unless I'm on the email thread with the co-op agent when we're scheduling the closing, if I've scheduled it, I always send them an email saying, hey, you know, I've scheduled for this time and date in this location. And the reason I do that is that, I mean, it really saved me one time. I had a deal for a transaction for Kay Evans. She's the now retired Southeast Regional Director of Keller Williams.
Boiling more spaghetti. Grace, Faith.
Hey, Lisa, you're
Oh, sorry.
Uh-oh, what happened?
Her screen froze.
Yeah.
Yeah, her screen is frozen.
Didn't this happen the other day?
Yeah.
It's probably the storm. It's in front of my house.
Oh, yep.
I was outside on the balcony. I had to run in because it started storming outside.
I love your background though.
Yeah, you looks like you're in a sunny place.
Can you all hear me? It's Michelle.
Yes, we can hear you,
Yes,
Michelle.
Michelle.
Okay, we must have lost Kim. So I'm gonna just jump right in. I was enjoying the conversation. When she comes back on, we'll let her go back in. But how many of you have your Ignite books? Did you get Ignite books? Yes, no, maybe? No.
I had a digital version.
I didn't purchase the physical.
Okay. What I want you to do then is I want you to write this down, because this is going to be something, an exercise that I want you to do, because it will help you. Kim has given you lots of ways to stay on track. What you're going to start to learn is you're going to become a problem solver. So the best way to explain that is as you learn the system, you're going to now start to anticipate, here's what should happen, what could take us off track. So how many of you have ever planned a party at your home or party? Okay, Sarah raised her hand. Alicia, don't you go through and go, this is what I need to make it happen before the guests come. So long years ago, I worked for Marriott Hotels. I was a catering manager. And so I would plan parties, but I had to plan everybody that was going to be involved and what they were going to do and the timing. And this is exactly the same thing, because what do you think your party is? What's the big finale of your party? Somebody give me a
Closing.
closing. That's right.
Closing.
Party for them, party for you, because that's when you get paid. So if you will go to the manual, and you can download this part, it's actually going to be page 20 on the close the deal. It's called Your Turn, Be a Problem Solver. So I want you to go to, we talked about seasoned agents, why you want to get to know them. Go around or call them, or just say, may I have 5 minutes on a Zoom meeting, however you want to do it, and ask them these questions. And what I did is, when I went through this, it's actually 2 pages long, and it gives you things that can happen. So somebody just tell me something that could go wrong with a loan, not with the outcome, but just what could go wrong.
Go wrong with what?
I always say loan because I was on that side. What could go wrong with your transaction? That's
The buyer's loan doesn't get approved.
doesn't get approved. Okay. So if you're the buyer's agent, do you want to make sure that they have been pre-approved? Not pre-qualified, but pre-approved. Remember that Kim talked about that?
Pre-approved?
Pre-approved means that they have looked at documentation and that they have said, okay, I've looked at your pay stub, I've looked at your W-2s, I've looked at your tax return, whatever they're asking, and all these things work. Pre-qualified just simply means that if I were calling Alexis, I could say, Alexis, well, how much money do you make? And Alexis tells me, and I write it down. So they're not providing documentation at that point. So if for some reason they don't get if they don't get approved, it's probably because the actual process in the beginning wasn't strong. There are lenders that are extremely good at what they do, and there are brokers that are just third-party people that are going to ship someone's loan to be underwritten somewhere else. You want to get a firm understanding of those differences, because if you don't know, I can tell you what, if you brought a buyer to me and you said that they were not, you know, here they're approved. If I'm the listing agent, guess what I'm doing? I'm reaching out to that lender and saying, have they given their pay stubs? Have they given their W-2s? Have you run their credit? Have you done things? So understand, you don't need to know the process in its entirety, but you need to understand where it's at. And by doing so, you can start to eliminate some of those surprises. Does that make sense to you all?
Mhm.
Yeah. So what I do is I am not compliant when I'm a listing agent. I am picking up the phone and having these questions, because in your contract, it states that you, as a listing agent, if you're on that side, have the right to check on the progress of the loan. What other things can go wrong?
Can I ask you a question? Do you ask them for I guess you get that contact information?
I do.
Yeah.
I absolutely do. I'm not going to be in the dark on anything. And one of the things that I do is that I would then send out all the contract information and the important dates to that lender so that we're all on the same page. So hang on, here's Kim Smith. Yes, I am on the, yes, I am on. Okay. What other questions? Or what do you think other things that can go wrong?
Delay with due diligence items like appraisal.
Okay, the appraisal is not a due diligence item. It's going to be separate from it, but there can be delays, let's just say on inspection. Right now with COVID, sometimes it's harder to get. So if you anticipate that you're going to be writing a contract, if you're the buyer's agent, contact the inspector or inspectors that you might want to work with and say, what is your turnaround time right now? So you've just done your own due diligence to make sure you can meet the criteria. Remember, most of the inspectors are going to work Monday through Friday. Some will work Saturday. So if you're getting ready to come out of, you're making an offer and it's Thursday and it goes binding on Friday and you've got 10 days in there, you have potentially lost 4 days of that because you've got weekends, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where you just start thinking it through. Does this make sense? Now, you could always ask for an extension of the due diligence.
Okay.
The same thing you could do for an appraisal, but let me just tell you this, because y'all are going to be amazing listing agents. I already know that, and that's more fun because you can be sitting on the beach maintaining your listing while everybody else is driving around. So anyway, what I would do as a listing agent, if the appraiser hasn't contacted me within a certain period of time, I'm calling the lender saying, I haven't heard from the appraiser, because I do want that to get done so that we're not extending out or I'm not having to ask my seller to extend out. As a buyer's agent right now, it is extremely busy. Do not ask for the lender to hold off on doing the appraisal until the due diligence is over. Anybody been out to Hartsfield International when it's busy?
Yes.
Hartsfield International Airport, the plane says they're going to leave at 2:30, but then they have to get in a line to take off, correct? So if you delay and you tell them do not order the appraisal until the inspection is over, you've just wasted 10 days of maybe their 21 days. And I have agents that I have to tell this all the time, let it go, let it keep running, because what's the worst that could happen? Let's just say the appraisal hasn't been done and you don't come to an agreement on your due diligence, the inspection. You can cancel the appraisal, but you may cost your buyer their earnest money if you think by holding off on that it's a good idea, because they might miss that appraisal contingency. Now we know FHA and VA, there is no appraisal timeline, but in unconventional there is. Does that make sense to you all? Okay.
Yeah, that does.
If it doesn't, well, all I want to do is just put that bug in your ear that you go, oh, I remember there's something about it, so that you can ask your broker or someone in your office. What's another thing that could happen that you wonder about?
Can I ask you a question though?
Okay.
There's nowhere in this discussion that we talked about surveys. What if there's an encroachment?
Well,
or easement? Where does that come up and when does it get resolved before closing?
The survey is not required in this state. If you want, you can ask the listing agent, does the seller have a survey, so you can take a look at it. It doesn't protect them. The title insurance, if they get title insurance, if your buyer gets title insurance, that I think it's called an Eagle, where it's like the best policy. If there was an encroachment issue, it would cover that. What I would tell the buyer is that a survey is not required in this state. It's not that it's not a great idea. A typical survey costs about $450 and can tell you a lot. If you want to get it, we want to order it now because we would want to do it during the due diligence period so that if there was a problem, you knew it during that time. So that's a conversation that you need to have. I would talk with an attorney and get more facts on that. I happen to know, here's what I would do. There are survey classes that are there that are available. Take that survey class. It's a CE class. It's really a good class. It's interesting of the things that you will learn and you will become, but it's not, to answer your question now that I've really gone down the rabbit hole, it's not required. And there could be encroachments because it's not required.
Okay, thank you.
All right, what else can happen? These are great. See, every Tuesday, for those that are in my market center, we do lessons learned, and that's my time to share things that have happened this week or this past week that we don't want somebody else to go down the black hole. And so we talk about these things. But keep going with questions, because then we're going to go to something fun.
I was going to ask you what you see most often. Is there something you see repeated often by agents, or the test? Sorry.
There's several things that are repeated. Earnest money, the questions regarding earnest money is continually repeated. You know, how do we protect our clients' earnest money? That's your job, to be watching the dates. That's, you know, we talked about, you can't just be at the end of the financing contingency and say, well, we'll just tell them that we didn't get approved. That doesn't work, because like I said, I challenged another brokerage and we won, and we got $8,600 for our seller. So I want you to be smart and just watch those timelines on earnest money. That's the biggest problem. The next one has been the appraisal, where the agents thought that they were smarter than the average bear, said to the lender, hold off on the appraisal until we get through due diligence. And then they were out, they didn't have enough time. And here's what the problem is. If you're going to do that, you better have that conversation with the buyer, because what's worse, to lose I think it's $450 for an appraisal now. What's worse, to lose that or maybe $4,000 in earnest money? Because what happens is, if you miss that financing contingency, appraisal contingency, then they just bought the property at whatever it appraised for. And so if they were paying more, they're going to have to pay that difference. So it creates, those are probably the two biggest things that come up. You know, we see, let's see, I'm looking, this sheet is going to give you inspection and repairs. Here's one that's interesting. On my newer agents, they'll say, I don't understand this inspection report. Can you help me? Well, that's pretty common. So here's what I would recommend is, until you feel like you know enough, you're never going to know things about electrical and I mean, that's just not your, that's not your expertise. But do go to the inspection and ask the inspector, what are the things that are of most concern? They're going to usually give you an inspection that is called health and safety, because they're going to indicate that those are the things you need to concentrate on. And if you need to understand that before, while you're preparing the amendment to address concerns, call the inspector. they're going to be able to tell you more. And the inspection report is going to give you pictures and it's going to give you information. That's probably the hardest thing to do because we're not professional electricians, HVAC, foundation, things like that. But if you're doing the listing, you might suggest that they have an inspector come out beforehand and go through the house so that there's no surprises. I mean, you can do that. Some people do, some people don't. What else?
Buyer's remorse. They change their mind simply say, I don't want this house anymore.
Well, that happens. That happens. You know, and I've had it happen before. As long as it's during the due diligence period, that's okay because you can keep, you know, you can get their earnest money back. They can certainly terminate with no just reason. But if you've just worked hard, shown them 55 houses, and you're like, oh no, what I would usually do is I'd have a conversation because people call us salespeople. I don't. I call us consultants. And my conversation would go, what is it what's causing this problem? Is it the payment amount? Is it a concern that you're going to be qualified? Is it what does it? Because if you start to ask questions and then you let them answer that, a lot of times just by them talking about it, they will then reveal and they may feel better. And sometimes just sleeping on it overnight will take them off the ledge. But, you know, that's where you need to have that relationship. Anybody else can think of anything else? Anastasia, what would I'm calling you and I'm saying, you know what, we wrote this contract. I think I just want out of it. I'm not feeling good about it. Role play with me. Tell me what you would ask me.
I'm sorry, what's the question one more time?
I just don't want to buy this house. You know, I don't really, I'm not sure why. I'm just not having good feelings about it. And I want you to role play as though you're the agent and you're going to ask questions to me. Oh. Guess what? You got off the hook. Here comes Kim Smith.
Okay, lovely.
Kim?
Hello.
Hello. All right, I'm going to say one quick last thing. I want you all to, I told you that we were going to do the fun thing. At the end, you always want to show the appreciation for your client, whether it be the buyer or the seller. You don't have to spend a lot of money. And if you go to your Ignite manual, they do on page 28 just some ideas. It can be, I used to love to throw a housewarming party for them and invite their neighbors. Now they have to go along with that. You can't have a party at their house without their permission. But I would do hors d'oeuvres and I would do things for them so they could meet their new neighbors. Why would I do that?
To get business.
To get business, because the other neighbors are going to go, God, my agent never did anything like that. This is amazing. And I used to do it in one neighborhood, and I continually took the listings in there. I was the predominant agent at that point, and it's fun. So if you don't like to cook or like to put on parties, find somebody that does. It's not very expensive, but it will get you things threefold. Okay, Kim, go back.
Well, it's good to be back here, everybody. Michelle, how much time do we have?
You have 8 minutes.
All righty then. So we're going to send the co-op a closing confirmation email with directions. Order the home warranty if that's required and send it to the buyer and the attorney. The loan process. So we already kind of went over this, but we're going to go through this again. The buyer submits the loan application to the lender. Within 3 days, the lender must send the buyer a loan estimate. Within 10 days of the loan estimate, the buyer needs to sign the disclosures or intent to proceed, and everybody knows why. The appraisal will not be ordered until the lender has received that signed intent to proceed. Next, the appraisal gets ordered. Some agents may request that the appraisal is not ordered until the due diligence period is completed. The downside to this is that the appraisal may not come in until after the contingency period has expired. So some agents, many people want it ordered right away, but if you order it after due diligence, just be aware of the contingency period or your appraisal contingency period in order to allow that to come back in time. Processor will send the loan paperwork to the underwriter. The underwriter is going to review the paperwork and compare it to the requirements. The appraisal will come back either at value or low. If it's low, then the process is going to be paused until either an amendment is signed to reduce the sales price or comps are provided to persuade the appraiser to raise the value. The underwriter then comes back with a conditional approval. This means that the loan is approved, but additional documentation must be received before the loan commitment is issued. Receiving the conditional approval should satisfy the finance contingency. So we've gone over all of this. The loan remains with the underwriter while the steps or conditions are submitted. Approximately 5 days before the closing, the underwriter is going to review the loan again. If all the items needed are present, they're going to issue a final approval or a clear to close. If any condition has raised more questions for the underwriter, they're going to request more documentation at this point. Once a clear to close is issued, the lender will send out the CD to the buyer. Some lenders will do this much earlier in the process. So if you're using one of our preferred lenders, usually when the attorney has title, taxes, and HOA and sends that to them, usually they can actually issue the CD at that point. It seems to be the big box lenders that are not able to issue one until they have the clear to close. All right, once the CD is issued, the lender will send the loan package to the attorney. The buyer is now going to use their CD to wire their funds to the closing. The closing attorney is going to conduct the closing, and at the end of closing, the attorney is going to send the necessary documents back to the lender, and the lender is going to send a funding number, or they sent the wire with the loan package, and the transaction will fund. So that is that. Countdown to closing. So 14 days before, these are all the things that we're going to think about 2 weeks before closing, okay? We're going to verify with the attorney that the title is clear, verify with the attorney that title, taxes, and HOA have been sent to the lender, call the lender to verify when the CD will be sent to the buyer, verify the lender has received finalized insurance information, send copy of termite letter or bond to the attorney if required, send utility information to the buyer, upload any missing compliance items to Command, schedule the walkthrough with the buyer, and inform the co-op agent. Verify that the attorney has received all items needed to close. So this is a little bit more than a week out. You want to be finalizing all your details on the transaction. Call the lender to verify the signed CD has been received from the buyer. I start calling on that about 8 days out. And of course, that's due 3 business days prior to closing, okay? Send the pay at close or DA request to the office. So this is a form that your office will allow you to use. For Keller Williams East Cobb, you won't be allowed to do this on the first transaction, but what it allows you to do is walk away from the closing attorney's office with a check made out to you. And the way you get it is by submitting all your paperwork to the office, having it all approved, submitting this form, and then they give you a form to send to the attorney's office, and then they're going to cut a check to Keller Williams. They cut a check to you, they cut a check to FMLS, and to anybody else who needs a check. So that's how you can walk out of a closing with a check made out to you instead of Keller Williams, okay? Call the lender to verify that the loan's clear to close. Here's that deadline for the CD, 3 business days. Call lender and attorney for the loan package. Confirm the closing time with the attorney. Remind the buyer of utilities and closing time. Send the pay at close to the attorney. Pick up the earnest money check to take to the closing. Turn in checks to the office and upload your settlement statement to Command. All right. Here's the good news. Most of this we've already covered on the buyer side, so this is going to go a lot faster. Who wants to give me a hooray?
Hooray!
Review the contract and request any missing items. You're going to verify that it has HOA contact info, if applicable, and co-op contact info. Set your reminder of your contract deadlines. Send an email to your seller and to the selling agent with a reminder of important dates. Change your status in FMLS and Georgia MLS. Give that CBS code to the selling agent. Notify the seller of the inspection time and date. You're going to upload the contract to command, fill out your commissions tab and submit it to the office. Send the seller and co-op agent an email with the contract deadlines. Send contract to the attorney and the lender. Make sure that each has the other's contact information. So you can see, even though I'm on the seller side of this transaction, I'm doing almost exactly the same stuff as I'm doing on the buyer side of the transaction, because I'm not assuming that the other agent is doing all these things. Does that make sense? Because the minute you assume, you're going to find out you were wrong and they didn't, and something could happen. So to me, it's just good to just be, it doesn't matter if the lender or the attorney gets double documents, it's fine, but you want to make sure that you send it so that you know that it was sent. Verify that the contract has the co-op contact info and HOA contact info. Send seller contact info to the attorney. Request that they send the seller info sheet to the seller. So this is a form that your seller is going to fill out. Many times it's online and it's secured with all the information that the closing attorney's office needs to pull title and to get their loan payoffs and all these other things. It's going to ask if they've had a bankruptcy. It's going to ask if this is, you know, if there's any divorce proceedings. It's going to ask if it's an estate. It asks a lot of personal information. So if this is a piece of paper that some attorneys outside the perimeter might not be on a secured system, they might send you the piece of paper. If I forward that piece of paper to the seller, I say, hey seller, send that directly back to the attorney's office. Don't send it to me. I don't want your social security number. I don't want your information, okay? So that's how I handle that. I don't want that form coming back to me. Verify we have a copy of the earnest money. So I want to make sure that I get a copy of the earnest money so I know that the buyer gave that to their agent or to the attorney's office. Confirm that the buyer has made loan application and that the lenders received the intent to proceed. Order termite inspection if required. Negotiate the inspection and submit any amendments to the attorney and lender. So here's our countdown to closing. Schedule closing time with the attorney. Send the seller and co-op a closing email. Order the home warranty. Call lender to check the status of the appraisal. Sorry about that. Call lender to check on the conditional approval. Check to see the title is clear. Title, tax, HOA have been sent to the lender. So this is the exact same stuff as the other side, okay? Verify that the attorney has received the seller information sheet. Verify with the lender when the CD is going to be sent to the buyer. Upload all missing compliance items to command. That's about 12 days out. You want to make sure you get all those in there so that your file can be approved by your compliance person prior to closing. Send a copy of the termite letter bond to the attorney if it's required. Inform the seller of buyer walkthrough date. Verify attorney has all items needed to close. Call lender to verify the CD was acknowledged by the buyer. Send your pay at close request to the office. Call the lender to verify the loan is clear to close. Here's that deadline again. You want to make sure that the buyer has acknowledged the CD. You're checking on the package. Confirm the closing time with the attorney. Remind the seller of utilities and closing time. If you use a pay at close, you're going to send that to the attorney. And you're going to upload your settlement statement to command and change it to sold in Georgia MLS. Boom. 4:01 p.m. How'd I do, Michelle?
Amazing. Whoa, 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 whoa. All right. Okay, well, let's do this. While I am taking screenshots for everyone, let me start that right now. And you all can be asking, did you have any ahas, something you learned today that you had no idea?
I have a question.
Yes.
To me, this seems very overwhelming. Is there somebody in the office, like, what's the duty of the secretary in the office? I mean, can this all be handled by somebody that is being paid to do?
It is interesting that you ask that because that is what my company does. So let's say you get a binding agreement you don't want to handle all of these things. We can handle your first couple of transactions for you. We are sort of like a mentor. We're watching everything that happens. We're making sure you don't miss any deadlines, and we're here to answer any questions that you have along the way. It can be a little intimidating, right? Like, oh, well, the other agent said this. Is that true? And we're going to be like, no, that's not true at all. Here are the facts, or just whatever the case may be. We love working with new agents. So if you're interested, I'm going to put my information. Do y'all have access to the chat? I'm going to put my information in the chat. And you all could, if you want to reach out to me when you have a contract, my information should also be there in the office, but I don't guess anybody's going there anymore, are they? Smith.
Excuse Kim, are we able to get a copy of this presentation because it was really nicely laid out, the information?
I'm going to get a copy together that can be sent out. The copy that Michelle has isn't ready for that yet. So let's say we can get that out to you tomorrow or the next day. How would that be?
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I've taken the screenshots. If anybody wants to hang on and share any ahas, you can do so. Otherwise, you're done, and I will see you tomorrow. All right.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciated it. I love teaching this class.
Quick question, Michelle.
Yes.
What type of stuff is going to be on our
test?
I guess our test, yeah.
Well, here's what I would tell you. No, there's nothing that's really mind-boggling. There's nothing hard. Everything that's on the test is in your Ignite manual. For those of you that have chosen to just do it online, you may have a little bit of a disadvantage because you weren't making notes and highlighting things as you went along. But it's not, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything on there. There's plenty of questions that are common sense. Okay. So if you have been engaged in this, you should be just fine. If you've got the manual, go through, just kind of skim through it. If you don't, you can download it and take a look at it. The test is 50 questions in it, and one of them is just an answer at the very end. Number 50 is, I promise you, it's not difficult.
So it's multiple choices then, one fill in?
They are, and some of the multiple choices are ridiculous. You know, it might say, who is, this is not a question, but it might say, who is the head of Keller Williams?
Okay.
Gary Keller, Mickey Mouse. Well, we know Mickey Mouse isn't the right, I mean, it's really some things that are not going to be difficult. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I appreciate you all. You did amazing. I would do business with any one of you all. I don't have to, I'm licensed, but I would if I wasn't. So thank you all for being so attentive.
Well, you were amazing.
Can I be your number 2?
Yes, you can be my
good one.
That's right. Cindy, great answer. Question.
That was a good one.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? You all were fun. I can't wait till tomorrow. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Lisa, if you want to text me your email address or tell me your email address, I'll send that to you.
Okay, yeah, I just put it in the chat. It's just my name, Lisa Byers at kw.com.
Great, I'll send that right now.
I want it as well. I want it.
I got my email address. Put your stuff in the chat for me.
Okay.
Miss Byers, was I in the screenshots?
Oh, who just asked me that?
Huh?
Tatiana girls.
I think so, because I recognize that European look in the background. Your window's open, sure.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you.
Don't shut it down yet, Michelle.
Hey, is there a way we could get the attendance records?
Oh, you'll have to ask each one of you need to ask your either assistant team leader or productivity that's doing that, because we all have access to see it so that they can check for you.
Okay.
Is that cool?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Michelle, for our office, would I have to ask you or Kimberly Griffin?
It would be me.
Okay. All right, thanks.
It would be me.
Well, if you can check that for me, please.
For Atlanta North, it would be me. For Atlanta Perimeter, that would be Stacy Stubbs. For City Side, I'm not sure. CC Osborne can find it out for you. Your team leader. Peachtree Road would be. Oh gosh, she's new into her position, and I don't remember your productivity.
Katie Staples.
Thank you. I'm sorry, and she's done such a great job. I should remember. And Buckhead, it could be Ben. Okay.
Hey.
Any other questions? There's no charge for them right now. Okay, y'all are off and running. Good for you. Thank you for your time.
Kim,
Yes,
one quick question.
sure.
When we were talking about the appraisal contingency, like for the dates, like for the deadline, are you able to get, and it's like, what's the form for the extension? Because like I'm in a situation right now where my buyer had, during the middle of the process, kept changing his lender. And obviously the original contract stated that there was X amount of days. So we're right at that point where it's like in a day or two, it's probably going to expire.
You can just use the regular amendment form for that.
Okay. So I can,
I would just say something like, buyer and seller agree that appraisal contingency date shall be extended to, and say whatever date, through whatever date it is.
okay. So
That's right. And so do you want me to show you the form on the screen?
Yeah, please. Even after the due diligence, that's fine.
Yes, as long as you're sending this amendment before the end of the appraisal contingency period, because that's your concern, right?
Right.
You're
So,
extending the appraisal.
yeah. So if it's after that time frame, then there's nothing you can do about it. Correct.
Correct. If you go past the appraisal contingency deadline,
Mm.
and then your appraisal comes back low, your buyer will be obligated to purchase the property for the
Whatever the price is.
sales price and come up with the extra cash between the.
Okay.
Dwayne,
Yeah.
are they doing an FHA or VA loan?
Conventional.
Oh, okay. Darn it. Okay.
I know, because I was thinking the same thing.
Here's the amendment to agreement. It's F701.
Okay.
This is what I would use.
Okay. So if as long as it's within that time frame, we're good.
That's
to use
right.
that.
Make sure you get it fully executed and bound prior to 11/59 on the appraisal contingency deadline date.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Kim Smith. You did an amazing job. as
Thank you. It was
always.
fun. I love doing this.
All right. I'm signing off. Good night,
All right.
everybody.